Welcome to the Monday, December 16th, 2024 meeting of the Dennis-Yarmouth Regional School Committee. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will start with our student representatives report. Ms. Powers and Ms. DeBrea.
Good evening, everybody. I figured we'd start off with our recent sports news at DY. So our girls hockey and basketball and girls basketball both had their home openers this Saturday, and girls hockey won by a landslide, and girls basketball played a really good fight, and they were neck and neck right up until the end. And our boys hockey opener is taking place at 4 at Tony Ken on Wednesday, so everybody's really looking forward to that. We also had our first official track meet last week against Nauset, which we also won in a landslide. So winter sports are off to a great start, and they have another meet again tomorrow. And also this upcoming Thursday, we have our annual Wave basketball event where all of our grades meet in the upper gym and support our unified basketball team. So it's a really cherished tradition at DY, and it's something people look forward to every year, right up there with the pep rally, homecoming spirit week, things like that. So everybody's sort of counting down the days until that, and that's what I have on sports.
And everything else, we have Interact Club just volunteered at a community Christmas party, and we are now hosting our annual gingerbread making contest for all grades on Thursday. The Pauline Hopkins Art Gallery is open for students all week, and there's a showcase on Thursday after school to show off the talents of our amazing DY art program. Voices Heard Book Buddy program, where we're going over to the little kids school and reading books with them. It's really fun. All of our English classes are busy preparing for Poetry Out Loud, which will take place right after break. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ladies. Next, we have our MCAS presentation for our elementary grades. Similar process as we had last week with our middle school and high school, and we are going to start with the intermediate school with Mr. Blake.
All right, good evening, everybody. So I'm hoping this one's mine. All right, so last year when I came and met with you, to be honest, I think I gave a pretty sobering outlook of kind of where we are and where we needed to go. So the good news for us is, as we get through these slides, if you look at it overall, our MCAS proficiency is up. That's in each subject in every grade. On the other hand, though, if any of my teachers were up here, they would tell you the same thing that I'm going to tell you as well. One of our internal goals is we need to be at least at the state average for everything, and then we're going to set plans for moving beyond the state average, so we're not there yet. When we look at one of our goals that's aligned with the district improvement plan in terms of eliminating achievement gaps, our results are a little bit scattered. Some places we're doing well, and some places we still have places to improve. So we're excited that those proficiency scores are up, but we still have some more work to do. This is all right, great. All right, so if you look up here on the left or in your packets, in terms of math in fourth grade, our overall MCAS proficiency went up 4%, and in fifth grade that went up 10%, so that gives you the graph on the left. I put the graph all the way over there on the right. I know when Mr. Deppin's going to come up here, he's going to speak to you a little bit more about average scaled scores, so you can kind of see how far we are from the state in terms of average. When you kind of get down into the nitty-gritty of that data, though, at least for us in our school, that's a lot of dots of kids who are taking MCAS, so it's a little bit harder to pull out of there. So I'm just going to concentrate on the overall meeting expectations and exceeding. When you look at literacy, in fourth grade, our MCAS achievement went up 5%, and in fifth grade, it went up 3%, so you can see that line moving up. We still have more work to do, but we're, again, happy that we're moving in the right direction. When you start to break it down into groups, so on the left is English Language Arts for students on IEPs and not, so you can see with both lines there is improvement, and actually the gap has started to decrease on the left and the right. So both in math and ELA we do see improvements in terms of achievement gaps and overall proficiency. I'm not going to spend too much time here because if anything, it's a gap in a different direction. So our students who are on 504s are actually outperforming our students who are not on 504s. You want me to hold on a minute too?
Sorry, Mr. Blake.
That's fine.
Our packet is not in the order, so they have the same slides, but for different schools, so I think everyone was
Want me to
behind.
like lather, rinse, repeat, and do the whole thing again?
No, we could see on the
sure?
screen. But we'll catch up, and we have the screen in front of us, so thank you.
Okay. So when you look at students who are low income, so if you look at the two trend lines, they're moving in the right direction. So in literacy, you see they're moving up. We'd like them to move obviously up a little bit more quickly, and the gap is about the same. If you look at the one on the right, again, you see improvement in each group. But if anything, though, on the right-hand side, that gap got a little bit bigger. When you look at English language learners, again, on the left-hand side is literacy. So you see increase for students who are not EL students, and if anything, for students who are, if there is an increase, it's really, really minimal. So that gap actually got a little bit bigger. And on the right, you see a similar trend where our students who are EL students improve, but not as much as we'd like. And that gap actually got bigger because our students who are not EL learners in math scored even higher. Hopefully I'm not the first person to come up here and say when you look at our results by race, sometimes with all the different lines, it's a little bit hard to kind of pull out what those trends are. When you look at our Hispanic students in both literacy and math, you see the trend of improvement there. So that would be one thing I think you can pull out of there. And the second one would be our black students are not improving enough. That is definitely something that you notice no matter how you look at our data in terms of race. Moving on to first language. It's kind of the same thing. Some of those colors of the lines are a little bit hard when you look up on the screen. So our two major groups would be English and Portuguese. So like if you look at literacy, you actually only see for 2023 and 2024, you see points there. So when you look at first language being English and Portuguese and look at that gap, it got a little bit bigger, and the students for first language of Portuguese are not improving as much as we'd like. So that gets into the achievement gap, how it needs to be better, even though overall we see improvements in terms of proficiency and MCAS scores for English and math. When you look at MAP scores, what I did for what you're looking at up here, so if I think back to when I was here before, it's probably around this time, so then I took from the winter, when I saw you guys last, into the end of the school year, and that's how we looked at our MAP results. So it's really from winter to spring. So in terms of literacy, if you look at that top line, that's growth. So 41% of our students scored at the 61st percentile or higher. That's the green and blue sections combined. And if you look at the bottom in terms of achievement, we would have liked our achievement to be higher, especially when you're looking at those green and blues. We're feeling like if those students are in the green and blue, they're more than likely going to be meeting or exceeding expectations. So we have 44% of our students at that 61st percentile or higher. But if you look at growth, which would be the bar from the left and the bar on the right, we only see a 1% improvement when you put those two together. Keep going. So math in the same sort of time frame. If you look at that top line, a lot of green and a lot more blue. So for winter, spring, we saw our growth of our students to be like 70% of our students at the 61st percentile or higher. And in terms of achievement, 52% of our students are at the 61st percentile or higher. And if you compare those two bars on the bottom, you see a 16% growth in the students who are achieving at those two top levels from winter to spring. All right, so when you put this all together and kind of what are we doing about it here, I'm going to read through some of this and try to explain what it kind of looks like if you were to be here at school. So I mentioned before, our school-based goal is really to get to that state average and then, go right by it. So when I say we completed a disaggregated data review beyond what is presented here, so what that looked like in our building, whether you're at 4th grade or 5th grade, We looked at students who are EL, IEP, what race they were, and what language they first spoke. So teachers looked at, like in 4th grade, if you're an English teacher and would say you improved 4% overall, did students who were EL students also improve 4%? Did students who are go right down the line? Like, did each one of those groups improve at the same rate that we did overall? So the answer is no. Some more and some less. So the reason that we did that is when you think of achievement gaps, I think if you ask just about any teacher, do you know what an achievement gap is? They're going to tell you. If you say if there's an achievement gap in Massachusetts, they're going to say yes. If you say, would you see one in our district? They'll probably pause for a second and say, most likely. But when you look at your own results and compare them and then walk into your class the next day, that's a much different feeling. And you can't do better until you know better. So really our first step was looking at all this data, thinking about their class, because you can't do better unless you know better. So that was our first big step. So math, I know we've heard this before in terms of last year. You'll hear from all the different principals. We got engaged in math leadership coaching, which is exciting. And from that coaching, same if you heard my teachers up here, they would talk about how we maintain our focus on math rigor to ensure all students are engaged in a task that's going to really cognitively engage them. So we have a curriculum that gives you a pretty scripted idea of what to do. And from that, you need to make choices. And what I tell teachers all the time is if you make a choice that's not in there, is that choice as cognitively demanding as what the book outlined for you. Like in a bad example, if you're just asking someone to read a definition off the board, is that really engaging 19 to 20 students? And obviously the answer is no, even though they can hear it. And what we have laid out is a pretty rigorous curriculum. Then the next couple bullets are observational focus, so that's myself and my assistant principals. What we like to do is to go into a math class and really focus in on that last half to last third of a lesson. So by then the teachers have delivered their instruction. And you just think when you were in school, like now you're gonna work on some problems. So the idea is not just to say, hey, turn to page 42, complete as many as you can. It's being what we call must-do problems. So the teacher is going to select 1, 6, 8, and 9, and that's the expectation for all the students. So then after we observe that, we talk to the teachers about why did you pick that? How did that relate to really the last problem you want to give them before they leave so you can measure success? And did the questions that you pick highlight all the strategies they were supposed to learn in that lesson? So it's really intentional and getting kind of really granular in terms of the feedback that we give to teachers. And like if my teachers right here, they would say, yes, this is what we do, this is when they come in, and this is how we do it. And what we look at in terms of a module assessment, actually we had one of these meetings today. So before we give the assessment, we look at the different questions, pick the ones we'd like to discuss the most, project how we think our students will do, look at the results, and then kind of then plan what to do next. For example, instead of sometimes seems like an easy answer, oh, we just need to reteach something that they did poorly on, we'll look ahead in that next chapter we're supposed to teach, and when that same topic comes up, to sit around and discuss how are we going to teach that, knowing that we thought that kids might not do that well, they didn't do that well, and what are we going to do within this curriculum to ensure they have better success? Because sometimes the answer seems easy, well, hey, you just reteach it, and it's kind of like out of context, but when it's in context within what we're supposed to do, I think we're planning to have better success. In terms of literacy, we did the same sort of thing, so I'm not going to explain that disaggregated data review again. One of the next things that we're doing as a school is establishing agreement on progress monitoring. So we give MAP 3 times a year and BAS 3 times a year. And we really want to have agreement in every classroom of what are we doing to progress monitor on the way instead of waiting to a BAS and MAP again, so we can adjust our instructional groupings. Also, in terms of writing is where we need to probably improve the most. So at least 3 times a year, we're going to analyze student writing for common writing prompts. So that's sitting in our PLC groups, deciding a writing assignment to give them, using an MCAS rubric to grade them, seeing how the students do, and then making instructional decisions for them. So what that might look like, a common one in 4th grade and 5th grade, is students often have difficulty with summarizing. They'll just kind of retell things. So if you ask them to summarize the story, they'll say first this happened, second. It's almost like they just rewrote the whole thing. So we work on, a common one would be summarizing, and then what myself and my administrative team would do would be purposely walk around, checking and writing lessons, see what the teachers are doing, and see if they're enacting that plan. Oop. Go back. There we go. Obviously, I asked the superintendent if we could put in science this year as well. So in science, they have that in grades 5 and grade 8, and then in high school, it's either 9th grade or 10th grade as well. So for us in 5th grade, if you look at the graph all the way on the left, in 5th grade, our students improved 10%, which we're really excited about. We still have some work to do because we want to get to state average and beyond. So one of the things that you'll hear from me again about what we would like to do is in terms of our related arts. So related arts would be like PE, health, all those classes. We want to change up one of those to include a STEM staff member. So for us, if you go back to way in the Wixon days, like we had 2 PE teachers, a health teacher, a library teacher, and a music teacher. We really weren't able to replace the health teacher with another health teacher. So we use PE and health to make sure the students are still giving health. So we're going to go from 3 of those teachers to 2. So really be budget neutral. So the focus of the STEM teacher will be the engineering standards, and that's going to give 30 additional classes to our 4th grade and 30 additional classes to our 5th grade in terms of science. So having that extra time on learning, plus that additional class time that we had when we extended day. Once we moved over here into the new building, we're going to keep increasing our instructional time. So right now we have a school-based group working with central office leadership to choose and fund an appropriate curriculum. So we're excited about that. And also with all that extended time that we've had, we do have a STEM coach here in the building that's working at our STEM Scopes curriculum. We look at the common assessments we give, how students perform, and he works directly with the teachers about how we can continually improve. So, that is, there's not another big slide after this, but I just, it's not moving. So, questions?
Thank you so much. We can go down the list, down the row if we'd like, and if you have nothing, you can continue, Mr. New.
Thank you. So I'm sorry I missed the first few pages because I couldn't find it in the packet, and it's difficult at this angle to see the screen for me. First off, what do you attribute the difference in the scores from 23 to 24 across the board? Because there's a huge upswing between 23 and 24.
Yeah. So I think there's lots of things. Some of the things that I detailed in terms of the instructional focus and what we've been working on, the greater attention to detail, the greater attention to our instruction. So the beginning of the school year, we did basically an activity with the staff and kind of like resetting our values and about like where do we want to improve. Instead of me telling you, gave it to the staff like where do we want to go. And the activity was a little more complicated than that, but we came up with reading, writing, and Tier 1 instruction. So the teachers have been really focused and really working harder in their instruction. So I think that's the biggest factor. I don't know what slice of the pie you want to give, but moving in here was a little bit easier said than done. And it does feel nice to be settled in this gorgeous building, to be honest with you. So moving in here and feeling really settled and feeling like, it's like when you move into your home and then you feel like you're really part of your home. I think that's a big difference too.
Okay. Because it is noticeable, and I would assume, that your analysis is correct. So, moving forward, what is the state average? Okay, you're talking about 41%, 45%, 47% are the scores that we're dealing with. So, where is the state average in relationship to where we are achieving?
So if you look at math, I know you said it was hard to see there, and I'm going to tell you to look there again and try to take on and off your glasses to do so. So I don't have the number, but if you look at math, like terms of proficiency levels, it's a little over 40%, and we're probably somewhere, mid-30s. So it's really, Go ahead.
So what you're saying is there's a potentially 8% gap between state average and where we are achieving at this point?
I'm not going to give you the exact number because I don't know it without looking at my notes, but we got
Okay.
that much to improve.
Okay.
I would say what I've been telling my staff is like all those like different steps that we outlined of things to do, those are the ones that brings the numbers up. So if I tell the staff your goal is to improve 4%, what does that really look like? It's hard to say what does a 4% increase look like, but in terms of the different things that we're focusing on, I think that's going to bring the results that we're looking for.
All right, and so, am I correct, you are assessing the students 3 times per year?
I mentioned that for writing, that like we're like dedicating like, hey, as we're going to sit down, give the same writing assignment. I mean, kids are writing all the time, but in terms of like a common writing prompt and looking at it and doing it together, at least 3 times, yes.
Okay, and how many times for math?
So math in terms of the curriculum there's about 5 modules per grade level, and every module's got an end of module assessment. They have pre-assessment opportunities, mid-module. In math, there's enough assessments that we can look at that I don't need. If I brought another one to the table, the teachers would say, can we just look at the ones that we have?
Okay, and then you're saying there's going to be a change in the related arts program, programming to allow more time for STEM science. So what are you speaking about with that comment? What type of change are you planning on?
Right now, if you were 10 and kind of going through your related arts schedule for the year, you would be in PE, then you'd be in library, say PE, music, PE, and library. So those are kind of the 6 ones. Within those PE blocks, the students also have health. So we're just taking out one of those PE steps and
Okay.
putting STEM into there.
And putting STEM into there.
Yeah.
Okay. And just a side comment, do you feel that the staffing that you have for the coaches that are helping the teachers direct and implement the curriculum at an appropriate level is adequate?
I don't think there's any principal that wouldn't say more is, in some ways can be helpful, but we're very grateful for what we have. I think we use them pretty well.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Martin. Ms. Landers.
The first question has to do with the difference between students on IEPs and students with 504 plans. And, I mean, this isn't specific to you and your presentation. This is something we saw before, and I meant to ask, those of us who aren't, so knowledgeable about some of these programs, I think, and myself included, might not understand the difference here. You've taken out the students who have IEPs as one, population here, and their performance is well below, right,
Yep.
average, like far below average, and, but climbing, but
Below.
But then the kids on the 504 plans are performing better, right?
Correct.
So.
And I think that's probably pretty consistent in
Right.
most schools and
Yeah, we
most
saw that
years.
in other, what is that all about?
I don't think I have a perfect answer for that one, to be honest with you, Ms.
Okay.
Landers, so it's not like if,
All right, I'll
Yeah.
bug Maria later to explain some of that to me.
mhm.
Okay, that's all right. I just wondered if you,
I know, it's curious the first time you look at it. The first time I looked at it, I was like,
504s address different needs than IEPs, so I'm sure there's a really good answer for this, but we should probably share it for those who don't know. And my other question has to do with, when we built this building I feel like I'm so loud right now. When we built
a
this.
little bit. Me too.
When we built this building to consolidate Wixon and Mattakees, there was a lot of discussion about, the pros and cons of bringing 2 schools together and the 2 different the different grade levels. And to me, one of the benefits of putting everyone together had to do with sort of collaboration and cross development and it feels very separate right now, right? We have intermediate and middle, we get different presentations, intermediate and middle, and I'm just wondering, are there not opportunities here, and maybe you are doing this, but opportunities for you and Mr. Bavino to be sort of crossing over those lines and working with groups? You know, I feel like we've got some drop off in scores, you know, between the two levels. And what can you and Mr. Bavino and the staffs be doing to, you know, bring teachers from the middle to work with intermediate and vice versa to try to keep some continuity here and keep these scores moving up? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer in a little bit of a different way, and then I'll come around. So I would say the first time I worked in a middle school that was 5 through 8 as a new administrator, I was surprised, being brand new, that it was like 5th grade and everybody else. So it really ran not like 2 schools within a school, but even within one middle school that was 5 through 8, the 5th grade was much, much, much different than grades 6, 7 through 8. So in some ways I'm kind of leading into answering your question a little bit, where some of the curriculum work, there's opportunities where we could probably be together more. And there's some opportunities where I feel like if we were together, the teachers be like, it's so different just in terms of curriculum or even with expectations of students that sometimes that collaboration would seem a little bit forced. So I think if Mike was standing right here next to me, he would say that there's definitely more opportunities to do that than we've taken advantage of, without a doubt. But I think the other reality is true too. It's much different. And I think, you know, I came from working with older students. It's different. You know, and sometimes it should be separate and should be different.
Thank you.
Ms. Bemis.
When I was looking at your slide for sort of what comes next, I was looking at English language arts, and you were highlighting writing, which I understand because it begins to be a major emphasis in starting in the 4th grade. But what about other parts of literacy, reading, vocabulary development, though, and especially in the 4th grade, as you are a transitional or receiving school, what information do you get from, the 3rd grade transition, so you know what interventions to make for those who may be struggling still with comprehension or sort of those fundamentals before you can write with fluency?
So from the teachers, we have ways of kind of internally them getting all the information that you could talk to in a little bit more of a high-level way. We have access to their scores in terms of math. We have access to their scores in terms of math. Teachers give us direct information. We work with the administration from each school. So a lot of that comes up. And then I feel like when you're the receiving school, I mean, this works for every school unless you're probably, I'm sure kindergarten would say the same thing too. Kind of when you put all the kids together in a little different format to see kind of how that plays out, to be quite honest with you. If you see the same gaps and the same difficulties, and sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. I think in terms of writing, when you look at our scores overall, we have places to grow everywhere with literacy. Writing is the place where I think we need to focus most of our energies, because that's where our scores are. When you think of like where the state is and where we are, writing is where the greatest gap is. So there is work to be done in reading, there is work to be done in vocabulary, and we do work on those things. But in terms of, if I listed all the kind of different standards within literacy up there, I think we probably all agree we got to start with writing. The kids need to write more, and we need to be more targeted with our instruction of where they need to improve.
Thank you. One of the slides that I keep going into is the student group by race in both math and ELA. It's the one that I just kept looking at. The one thing I do see is that from 2019 to now, the numbers seem to start evening out. So, we did see some downward trends, but it seems like we're going up. Some of the things we haven't seen at our last presentations were many things going up, but what, me drawing lines on 10% from 0 to 50, the white student is close to 49%, and the Black and Hispanic are barely at 10%. And it's just, when we look at it by race, it's just a hard thing to swallow. And it's just, you know, as we look at our students by all of the different metrics and we talk about it, it's, you know, what are we going to do about it? And is our steps going to address all of those things? And I hope they are. And I know you talked about the math leading coaching, you know, and I know that all of us received an email from, you know, one specific teacher and a concern about coaching for students. And I know in the elementary school, we, you know, there was literacy coaches and they met individual students. And I don't know what we have, to be honest, in the intermediate school for coaches and how many, in ELA or math on the student level. Do they do subgroups? Do they have other opportunities other than in the classroom?
So I'll answer that two ways. One is first in terms of the data and where it is. The first part's acknowledging it, because it would be easy just to look at our MCAS results and say, hey, everything is up, smile and move the other way. It's a little bit more difficult to say, yes, we're doing good, and that same success isn't enjoyed by different groups of students and we need to improve. So that's really the first step, because if we just said, hey, we're doing better and moved on, then there really be no chance for improvement. And that's why I said, like, talking about, like, reading an article about an achievement gap's one thing, looking at your own data is a second thing, like as a school, and then thinking about the kids in your class is a lot different. So those are the steps that we've taken. And in terms of coaching, we use the coaches more with teachers than with students. So we have 2 math coaches here that work with the different students, different teachers. So we break them up into 4th grade and 5th grade, and we share them amongst the different other elementary schools, so they're not here full time. We do have a literacy coach who is here full time, so she works with both 4th grade and 5th grade. So that work is with Ms. Santini, with myself, and with the teachers, and they complete coaching cycles. Obviously, some of the things that we ask them to work on are things that we just outlined here, and how those coaching cycles look are kind of based on our school improvement plan, the district improvement plan, and where we need to improve.
Perfect. And I know, you know, later on in our meeting, we're going to talk about budgets and stuff like that, and hopes and wants. And there's a lot of things that we all think and know would be better to have, but again, it's what we can and able to have. And I see Mr. New raising his hand with another question. He found a slide he missed. We're ready. Go ahead.
Found a lot of slides. So trying to draw some correlation between the presentation from the last meeting to this meeting, the 2019 cohort in 2021 had a severe drop in their 5th grade scores. And so looking at your charts here, 2021 was an upswing from 2019, and then I'm looking at the ELA trends, and then 2022 saw a severe downturn, and then kind of status quo over the next 3 years. So, you know, I'm trying to tie last meeting's presentation with this presentation, with the 2019 cohort that was being tested in 2021. So what practices have you employed or implemented from 2021 to this point that have benefited the overall student test scores?
So I'll try to answer that a couple different ways. So 2019, 2020, 2021, those are those times like COVID and things like that that we really don't want to keep talking about, where the state, you can see, like just in literacy, you can see the state has gone kind of, if you drew a trend line, it'd be going down. And our trend line, while it was going down, that first year was kind of going up. So I know if you look at kind of, I look at almost like my history when I was at Wixon, like you saw an improvement. So that felt pretty good. Then we kind of shut down and, you know, we went down. So in terms of what that cohort is like and how that relates to the last meeting, I'm not going to, I don't know if I can even comment on it because I was not here. I might have been in my office, but I wasn't sitting right here listening to it all. You know, it's hard. You've seen how we had to change education affect different groups in different ways. So in terms of how it affected that specific cohort of kids, I don't know how much I could speak to it.
All right, so maybe I'm interpreting incorrectly. So your scores up there for 2022, 23, and 24, those are the same class or are not the same cohort?
They're not the same class.
Okay, so, got it. Thank you.
There you go. All right, other questions?
Thank you so much, Mr. Blake. And I think we're going to have Ms. Kelly next on Station Avenue. Station Avenue is not next in the packet, so Ms. Kelly's going to walk up slowly. So
Slowly.
Mr. New and other members can get to the correct page. We're almost there. I think we're good. Thank you, Ms.
All
Kelly.
right. So for Station Ave, we started out on kind of a high note with math. We are up 7% from last year and 17% from the state, with 59% of our third graders meeting or exceeding, which we're really proud of. There was a lot of hard work and targeted focus last year on student data, and I know that teachers in the third grade in particular took it upon themselves to do individual or small group drills to close some of those skill gap areas, and we saw a lot of payoff in those teacher decisions within the classroom. For ELA, we don't have the same happy story. We're down 5% from last year, and we're also down 5% from the state. We had 37% of our students meeting or exceeding. This gives us important information on that a change of practice is needed, and that I will outline further in this presentation of kind of what explicit steps we're taking at Station Ave to help course correct some of our ELA data, because this will match some of the trends you'll see in our subgroups to come. For the IEP subgroup, and Ms. Landers, I can explain the IEP 504 piece from my interim world. Students on a 504 have a life-impacting disability, but they don't necessarily have difficulty accessing the curriculum. That's kind of something that sets them apart. If you're on an IEP, you need accommodations or differentiated instruction to access your education. So students on 504 can access their education, but they need accommodations for things like, you can be on a medical 504 if you have diabetes and you need access to snacks or breaks or just accommodations of that nature. You can also be on a 504 if you're anxious and you need accommodations to have longer test time or scaffolded, those sorts of things. For an IEP, you need the curriculum modified, and you need a learning disability to that extent. So that's why you'll see a difference in presentation kind of globally on that account. And what you can be on a 504 is really wide-ranging. So when you have a small group, a small subgroup with a wide-ranging profile for 504s, you're going to see kind of disparate information. And then it's not shocking, but it is hard to see the achievement gap in this subgroup, because students with learning disabilities often, because of their disability, aren't able to access the curriculum, which is why they're on an IEP, but it still doesn't make that data easier. So to that point, for the IEP math subgroup, we had a significant decline. We had 9 students that represent that data point for 2024, which is 11%, who met or exceeded, and the year prior we were at 27%, so that was a marked decline, but that still is 9 students versus 11 students, which is a small cohort, and those disabilities can also be wide-ranging in special education. Not an excuse, but hopefully it helps explain it. For ELA, in 2023, we had 0 students meet or exceed on an IEP for ELA, which is why there is no data point, and so we did have an increase for ELA, and so we had 11% of our students on IEPs meet or exceed. For our 504 subgroup, this one is particularly difficult to look at, but I think it does correlate with what the specific subgroups are in a given year. I'll start with the math side of our 504. In 2019 and in 2024, we had 8 students on 504s with, like I said, kind of ranging qualifiers for those 504. In 2021, we had 4 students. In 2022, we also had 4 students. And in 2023, we had 6 students, just to give a range of what these numbers represent in terms of quantity. But for math, we had 25% meeting or exceeding, which was a big decline from the year prior. And for ELA, we've had a trend the past couple years of a big decline for ELA with this 504 subgroup, with the caveat that this is a really small cohort of students and a wide-ranging reasons that qualify them for a 504, which can impact kind of what their needs are and how they perform. But we are taking steps to address this and improve it, which I'll outline a little bit later in terms of what Station Ave specific action plan is. For our low-income subgroup, 45% of our students in the subgroup met or exceeded last year, and 45% this year. And then that was an increase from last year, which was only 33%. So we did make some strides with closing the achievement gap for our low income with math, but the gap continued in our ELA subgroup, which was 15%. We went from 32% down to 25% for the low income. For our, did I skip a slide? For our EL, excuse me. For our math EL, we went up from 10% meeting or exceeding to 17% in math, but we still have quite a gap there for our ELs. And then for ELA, you can see in 2021 and 2023, we had 0 students meeting or exceeding who are EL and ELA. And so we had a slight increase we had 15% of our students in the ELA subgroup meeting or exceeding. The race subgroup, I find this one particularly difficult to look at for the ELA, but for math, there are some great positives. You can see our Hispanic and our Black populations in particular had some nice gains, and big gains particularly from 2023. These colors are kind of difficult to pick out, but our students of Black identity in particular over the last 2 years have had kind of a marked decline in ELA, and we've been doing a lot of work to dig into why, and we're doing a lot of work in particular to focus on our subgroups, but also our achievement in ELA globally at Station Ave, which I'll get into in just a moment. For our students in first language, it almost looks like a finger painting. Our data is kind of all over the place, and these colors are difficult to pick out. Our other subgroup made nice gains in math. Our students who are first language in English had a nice kind of forward and upward trajectory. Of note, our Portuguese students for math did not make it onto this graph. And for ELA, similarly, our Portuguese just began to make it on for 2023, but none of them met or exceeded in the Portuguese subgroup as a first language in 2024, which is an important thing to acknowledge so we can inform some of our action steps going forward. Similar to what Mr. Blake had outlined, this is our growth as a school for reading. We went from the 54th percentile in the winter of last year using our MAP data to the 60th percentile. So we had a nice kind of overall gain, but there's still informed work to do in these different categories. Our goal is to certainly have more kids be over the 60th percentile and growing. Similar to math, there were some gains. We went from the 65th percentile to the 66th from the winter to the spring, but our overall growth, we had 19% in the green and 29% in the blue. We're hoping to shift all of those categories forward. This is a predictor for MCAS as well. And so now what? This gave us a lot of important information about Station Ave. I think overall, kind of globally, it uncovered that we have some challenges systematically about how we are supporting our students who learn differently. And so for literacy in particular, we have a school improvement plan which has a focus on early literacy, which is also in alignment with our district strategic plan. We have a targeted use of that additional 27 minutes, and we are using that for our WIN block, which stands for What I Need, where we have our interventionists, our EL teachers flooding a grade level at that time to pull targeted small groups. And we've been holding regular structured data meetings to look at student performance and inform what those intervention groups look like. We're trying to elevate our practice of looking at student performance data to inform our Tier 1 instruction as well as our intervention groups. So Ms. Bull, who's here, has been collaborating closely also with our instructional coaches, as well as myself, and in central office to look at our different data platforms and specific with our data platforms within Station Ave with literacy, and pulling out students who are performing below the 40th percentile and making sure that they have Tier 1 supports in the classroom, but also what are we doing about those students who are performing especially below the 25th percentile, and I'll get into a little bit more about what we're doing for that EL subgroup. We're deploying new structures to our monthly PLCs in literacy, so we're focusing on that data alignment. We're building off of a lot of great work that was started last year, but aligning our data with our instructional planning and coming up with a plan. All right, we have this amount of these targeted students in each classroom. Our literacy coach is going in to observe those guided reading groups. We've had a couple joint meetings with our interventionists and our EL teachers just to increase that communication and see when we dig into our EL data where those literacy barriers are and what we can do collaboratively to address it. We've been reviewing MCAS data and conducting vertical alignment data trends, so going beyond just grade 3, but looking at what our data is telling us within literacy. And there's a lot to do about writing and writing about genres, and so we're now carrying that down to as far as grade K, and working to adjust rubrics so they make sense in these different grade levels, so teachers have something concrete to measure the growth of the writing. We've been working to support a K screener committee that assesses students' entry with their entry literacy data, and that can afford us more time at the start of the year by having kids already screened and have informed placement at the beginning of the year, so we're not spending September or parts of October just getting that basic kind of launch data of where these students are, and that way we can get the intervention started a little bit earlier. We're also kind of trying to bridge more community partnerships with folks like the Cape Cod Children's Place. They have a lot of early literacy grants, and doing outreach to local preschools to get early families into our elementary schools earlier on and get that informed placement started. We're enhancing our SEI strategies for our EL students. This is a targeted focus given the EL subgroup data, and making sure that teachers are clear what these SEI strategies are. As part of my entry plan, when I met with staff, I reviewed all their licensure and made sure that all teachers were SEI certified, and folks who weren't came up with a plan with central office to help close them, and most of our staff were, but just kind of underscoring that this is a value and that we have to be taking this seriously in all domains that we teach. We are increasing collaboration between the interventionists and EL staff, as I talked about earlier. But within our, we have a platform called Elevations, which outlines our access data, and it really drills down into what our students are scoring in the 4 domains: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. And some of our students are falling down in the writing and reading, and there's targeted individual goals from that Elevations data. And so working with the EL staff to support them so that they're calling on those when they're doing their EL instruction, but also if there are students who are not progressing, are there ways that we can do a hybrid approach with EL instruction and ELA intervention with our interventionists, with reading specialists, and kind of do that hybrid approach to really target in a meaningful way for those students and get that growth up. We have an SAE leadership team that is a literacy leadership team that is also working to focus on that writing piece and responding to our writing, which has been a continual identified area for growth based on our MCAS. We're increasing opportunities for phonics-based instruction based on identified gaps from pre-tests. So this year, was the first year that we did, for example, the PASS, which is a phonics screener, and we're using that information and we're doing that screener multiple times for our kindergarten, but also for some students in older grades who aren't making growth, just so that we have targeted information about their foundation of literacy. We're supporting interventionists with pre and post tests to concretely measure growth during these intervention cycles. It's important to know where students start and where they've gone, and without that pre and post data, I don't know that we're informed as informed as we can be if the students have mastered those targeted areas. So we're trying to work on creating more data opportunities even in the short term. And then we're also, we just trained our staff on some updates to our student support team process, which looks at areas of concern that a teacher will bring forward. It's based in performance data, and then we develop a 4 to 6 week tailored intervention plan. This is an important precursor if a student is to be considered for the eligibility process with special education, or if a student is just not making gains and a teacher is looking for support from other experts in the building to kind of collaborate and grow that student forward. So some of these are a little bit redundant for our action steps for math, but these are, I put more intentionally for literacy given our achievement scores and to underscore that this is a priority area. For math, we've been working, doing some instructional leadership coaching with Eureka Math Squared, with building administration, our math coach, and central office. We've been doing structured walkthroughs and creating, for example, minimum success criteria for math lessons or just math look-fors. Our curriculum is really wonderful, but some of these lessons are very dense and they can be about 15 pages per lesson, and it's a lot for a teacher to digest. So we're trying to find ways to scaffold and support teachers to make the salient parts of each lesson more accessible, but also those learning objectives more prominent, so they know where they're taking their students at the end of a lesson, and that we have the data to inform our instruction as well. Our structured math PLCs monthly are data focused. In January, for example, similar to what Mr. Blake is doing, we're going to be focusing on end of module assessments and drilling down. We will have taken our third module assessment by that January PLC date, so that is 3 modules worth of assessments to drill down teacher by teacher and to look at how they're doing, and then what opportunities do we have to enhance our spiral review of certain concepts or target in our intervention groups. We're trying to increase our partnerships with families and to communicate opportunities where they can reinforce some of our deficit areas at home, 2 of those being our fact fluency and another being measurement. Measurement historically has been a challenge area, not just for DY, but globally. It tends to be a unit that comes up later in the spring, and just given our kind of modern world, students don't have as much authentic practice with counting and paying with things for money or reading analog clocks, and so we're trying to create and communicate ways for families to focus and practice that at home, and as well as making that a targeted focus. I just bought 2 grade levels worth of new rulers that go down to the 16th of an inch and match the MCAS rulers, so we're trying to make it a priority focus in a targeted way. Observational focus, so we're taking a look at teacher responsiveness to data as well as their pacing, making sure that they're able to get through these dense lessons in a timely way so that every student is getting an equitable educational experience, but also making it through each of the important lessons of those around 5 modules per grade level, so they're getting that equitable education, but also the full. We're analyzing the math trends from our MCAS and providing scaffolded opportunities to reinforce these skill areas, and so we're finding where these deficit areas and not pinning it just on grade 3, but communicating that information to grades K through 2 as well, and looking at curriculum opportunities to really reinforce that earlier on so they don't get to 3rd grade with some of these gaps. We're also conducting data-focused faculty meetings where there's a lot of data available on our student performance, and it can be a bit overwhelming. So having structured faculty meeting time where we're reviewing what these platforms are and how to drill down into these individual math concept areas and how it impacts student performance, but also as a teacher how to analyze that student performance data and inform your own practice. So just creating multiple opportunities for that so that teachers are accessing what's available within district in a meaningful way. And I kind of touched on this one earlier, excuse me. The end of module assessment data review meetings, and within these meetings, we'll project student success and use the projections, and then later the real data to see how we should adjust our tier 1 instruction and when the standard is the focus of the particular lesson. So it's a very long-winded action plan, but it is authentic to what we're doing. So any questions?
Thank you so much, Ms. Kelly. And I know as the newest principal, Mr. Devin, Ms. Mahady, let you go first, hoping that we'd be too tired by the time we get to them. But I'll let them know we have coffee, and we'll still be ready to ask
They
all
got
of you
stamina.
questions as well. But thank you so much.
No problem.
We'll start with Mr. New.
Thank you. I understand this is your first year. Okay, so my first question is, do you have the percentages of white, Hispanic, Black, and other?
No, I tried to write a lot of them down. No, I didn't write those down, but I can get it for you.
That'd be great, because I think it's important to understand what the percentages are and how they relate to the graphs that you're presenting to us at this point. Obviously, when you look at the charts, there's a downward trend throughout everything, particularly from 23 to 24, and most definitely ELA scores are in a downward path. So I know this is your first year, so implementation of programs and ideas at this point, what do you have to address the scores that you are now confronted with?
So as part of the school improvement plan, we're doing a whole focus on early literacy driven by what our performance data was, increasing our interventionists and how they're working with that data in a more meaningful way. I personally have structured, for example, our EL instruction. They only had one instructional space that 3 of them were sharing for 70 children. And so I cleared out 2 areas and got a partition and ordered 3 U-shaped tables, so there's 3 proper instructional spaces. Similar for our special educators, they were off in a corner of a classroom or working in a hallway or in the cafeteria. We're kind of over capacity a bit at Station Ave, so it doesn't sound very lovely, but I cleared out 2 storage closets and had them repainted and made sure they were compliant with DESI standards. So now there's 2 valid testing spaces for our special educators to either perform or to either provide CGRID, that pull-out service, or to conduct that special education testing in a proper valid setting. So some of it was facilities-based, and then other pieces of it are instructional-based, and a big piece is staff capacity. I have no doubt that Station Ave is full of a lot of dedicated educators. And so a priority area this year is focusing on their capacity and making sure that we're using the tools within the district as well as we can. And there's work to do, but by going through our district platforms and seeing how we can analyze data to inform our instruction has been an important first step. And I believe the staff are feeling the temperature turned up on our focus on achievement. And I think we are starting to see some growth in positive ways. They're starting to share that out about, achievement wins in the beginning of their class. So I guess it's threefold: data focus, facilities, and then culture, just letting staff know and ringing that bell over and over again that we're working hard, but we need to kind of shift how we're working to change the achievement, because I have no doubt that this Station Ave is full of staff who care.
So in line with that, when is the next assessment point where you will be given some more data to see what the growth is or achievement is, so that you can assess whether you're meeting your goals or not?
So for ELA and math, there are 3 benchmark assessments that happen in all the elementary schools: fall, winter, spring.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're about to head into our January winter benchmark assessment period, which will be important data for me in particular to see if the changes we've made have made an impact, or if we need to continue to make other shifts. And I think it'll be a mix of both. I think we'll see some increase in achievement, but I think there'll also be information about ongoing changes to our practice. And so we'll be repeating that phonics screener that we introduced this year that was new. We'll be doing our benchmark reading assessment, then we'll also be doing the MAP testing. So there's kind of 3 different probes for literacy in particular, that will give us information in the literacy front.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing what that assessment reveals.
Me too.
Dr. Smith.
Mr. New, just back to your first question, just because I was able to look it up real quick. So at Station Avenue, in particular, the demographic by race breakdown for the 23-24 school year, so relative to the data that Ms. Kelly presented tonight. So last year's enrollment, 11.6% of the student body identified, so this is again, not just the 3rd grade, this is the whole student body, but identified as African American, 1.2% Asian, 15.7% Hispanic, 0.9% Native American, 65% white, and 5.6% multi-race non-Hispanic.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Mr. Martin.
I guess the question that kind of bounces in my head when I'm looking at these, obviously you don't want to see plummeting like you see on the 504 math and ELA. You don't want to see students on IEPs doing progressively worse, but looking at, like, each graph is obviously one segment of the population, but I'm wondering how they kind of correlate to one another. If like the results from student group race for math and ELA and first language, how do those two correlate together? How many how many first language are students of color, or how many come into like the English learners, or how many are on 504s, or whichever. I would be curious to see kind of a cross-reference between a lot of these to kind of see what demographics, whether there's like how many kind of student or the student population that requires more than one approach, as far as that's concerned. Do you have any information on that at all? It doesn't appear like that's been kind of a trend in these presentations, but.
Yeah, so we had 11 students on IEPs in 3rd grade last year. We had 8 students on 504s. We had 70 students who were ELs. That's about 25% of our population who were ELs. We were talking about this earlier at our leadership meeting. When you get down to race, these are self-identified by families as they registered. And for example, we have students from Brazil, many students from Brazil, but some identify as Hispanic, some self-identify as Black, some self-identify as white. So that race component gets a little bit harder to drill down. When you zoom out, the overall trend is that these subgroups in ELA in particular, there's a growing achievement gap. So I've taken a look, big picture at literacy at Station Ave in particular, but then what are we doing specifically to close the achievement gap within each of these subgroups?
Ms. Landers.
Are you able to pull out cohort data for these grade levels the way we were able to see it for other grades?
So it's challenging for the elementaries in that they only have 3rd grade. So there's no MCAS data other than they have the 1 grade level that they take it. We actually met this morning, or this afternoon rather, to discuss this data prior, which it's my fault why your presentations aren't in order, because we played around with the order this afternoon, so I apologize after the packet was already put out. But we did have a conversation, we're always sort of thinking about next year. And so one of the questions we talked about is these slides in particular. I think next year, because depending upon the school, some of the numbers are actually really kind of small. So, you know, a 2-student difference makes a 20% difference. So I think these particulars, some of the subgroup data, I think we're going to zoom out and present at the district level, because then the numbers are larger and the outliers don't throw off the district data, and the trends are a little bit more reliable. That's sort of one piece. But going back to your specific question, at the elementary level, we started a conversation but didn't finish it about presenting some of the other data that we have that could be cohorted. It's not going to be MCAS data, but other data that we have internally that could be cohorted to sort of show patterns over time and how they correlate up to the MCAS data. So the short answer is no, because they only have third grade, so it's always the third grade class, and then it's a new third grade class. But we have already started about how could we look at some of our other data sets from a cohort perspective at the elementary level. I mean, at the pre-K3 level, K3 level.
Some of these are just so hard to understand, like what's going on here, obviously. You know, I'm looking at the student groups by race, math and ELA, and it's a little hard to tell which line in the packet is which, but so on the right-hand side here, we have Black students, right, in 2021 at, looks like what, 30%, and then in 2022 at 70%.
Right.
So
Incredibly disparate.
what on earth, but then drops right back down. So is that explained by a particular cohort? Right? I mean, it seems like a complete outlier. Statistics is certainly not my forte, but like, how can, like, this doesn't seem like a data point we can rely on in terms of trends, obviously, so this has to be explained by something.
I've been trying to understand it myself. I think there's a fair amount of transient population in Yarmouth in particular. I do know that Haiti in particular has faced, the last 20 years have been differing natural disasters, but there has been an increase of families fleeing from Haiti. And so, that can account for some of our students who identify as Black, but also are duly identified as EL. I'm not singling them out. I'm just saying sometimes we have increases in particular populations that have different needs. I've been trying to dig into it, and I think it does vary by year, and it varies by the students before us. And I don't want to make an excuse for it, because I think we need to do better, but I've been trying to dig into what some of those cause effects might be, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
Ms. Beavis.
I like your multifaceted approach, even involving parents in the community. I'm wondering some of the options you have used so far with the 27 extra minutes as sort of critical time, and what you might do in the future.
Sure. So this year, when I built the master schedule, I dedicated a given win block time with those 27 minutes that is outside of Tier 1 instructional time, and it was dedicated towards intervention. And then I had our EL teachers and our interventionists avail themselves during those 4 win blocks, so for the 4 grade levels, so that there was staff available to flood into, because I found that last year there was kind of a disparity in how those interventionists and EL teachers had structured their schedules, and so some classes had had heavy support, and other classes didn't see as much support, so trying to create a more equitable experience, but also opportunity for those small groups to happen in a meaningful way. So and we might look at that differently and come up with a more targeted approach, but right now this year we're focusing it on those students who are below the 25th percentile, and what opportunities there are for the interventionist to be pulling those students outside of Tier 1 time, so that students aren't being pulled during important instructional time, that time is kind of sacred for that intervention, but it's also an opportunity for students who don't need intervention to have an extension opportunity. So trying to think about both ends of the spectrum for our students and use that time in that way. And that's kind of how this year has been structured for those 27 minutes. But we're going to continue to progress monitor that data across this year, and if there are trends that reveal different focused needs for next year, then we would shift those 27 minutes to be used in different capacities.
Great, thank you. I had similar questions about the 27 minutes. You know, that 27 minutes sounds like a little when you talk about one day, but when you carry it over the week, you know, you're talking how many minutes for the week, and then you carry it to the year. And I know, you know, last year our budget was a tough one, and a lot of it had to do with these 27 minutes and how important those 27 minutes were to us, and how strong we felt about the cost that associated with that to ensure those 27 minutes alerting that we did to the other schools years prior and to the committee prior to me, and getting to where we wanted to get the school day to be at. And, you know, for those that help us get here, I know that it's important to them to know we're utilizing it. It's not an extra recess, right? It's not an extra 27 minutes to play outside. Whereas we do know on the K-3 how important it is for outside time and for recess, but, you know, that we're utilizing this time for education. And it's great to hear that there's you know, the targeted use of that time for what's most needed. You know, and to kind of the question Jenny was answering, this is not for you, this is out loud, of, you know, trying to follow a cohort. You know, they're in third grade in 2019, in 2021 they're fifth, in 2023 they're in seventh, 2027 they're in 10th, and kind of looking at their MCAS scores in math and ELA. And I know there's more MCAS after that, but to kind of see where our students are trending, and then maybe it's easier to see of where we need the most help, right? We all need to work on all the levels, but kind of see, you know, what it is. And, you know, I know we talked about the disparity from 2022. That could have just meant that we had that many less students who were of that, or we had that, so less people and they all scored higher, or we had a lot who were extremely talented that scored higher. It's hard to tell, because every year is a different student in this, versus some of the other schools that have it multiple times. So, you know, it's also the first time they're really taking a test that's being measured by people. So I know it's different, but, you know, I know when my student took this, it was a lot for him, but just the whole idea of it, just seeing where we are from year to year. And it is great to see that, you know, in math we are seeing the increase, but it is scary where we are in ELA in the younger grades and in the older grades. You know, and when I look at the math scores later in the middle school and the intermediate school, I continue to think the same thing, that ELA is the cause for some of the math, because, you know, I've said it before, that math is not numbers anymore. Math is word problems, and if you can't read the problem to know if you're adding or subtracting the numbers, then you can't answer the question. So, you know, I know we talked about spending so much time on ELA, but ELA and literacy and the measurements stuff are really going to be the things that help them get in both sides of it. So, you know, this early learning is so important. You know, and I know that other teachers will say the same thing as we talk about our buildings are already at capacity. You know, this building is at capacity, and Station Ave at capacity, and later on we'll talk about you know, opportunities that we may have in the future. And it's a great thing to have, but it's, you know, making sure we have the tools for the teachers, and then the tools and the people for the students. So again, this all relates to our budget, and we'll continue to have discussions of what is needed and what we should have, and then it's our job to have discussions later on with the towns of what we need. So, Mr. New.
Thank you. Not for you, Kelly.
Okay.
Relax. This is for Dr. Smith. So trying to get a better grip on baseline. Has staffing changed over the 5 years we're talking about?
I mean, yes, we've definitely had staffing turnover during that time.
Has there been a decrease or not?
Oh, you mean of overall
Right,
staffing?
overall staffing.
Okay,
I know
so-
there's turnover. Obviously,
all
there's gonna be
so,
turnover.
Sorry, I misunderstood the question.
That's all right.
So, last year would have been the first sort of significant staffing increase, or decrease rather. Prior to that, based upon the work I had done in my entry work, we were pretty stable and slightly increasing in staffing from 19 to 23. So actually, I guess really through 24. So this year, going into this current year, is the first. There had been other staffing reductions, and I'd have to go back. I have it in a chart. So, you know, don't hold me to gospel, but, you know, definitely through COVID, you know, so 2020, the COVID funds would have come into the 2021 school year. And we added, I think it was 17 total positions, if I remember correctly. It sounds about right, across the district. But last year, you know, total reductions across the district, total FTE was 35 and a half. So your net 30.
So
or
this
your
year is
net-
going to see a
your
reduction
net
in
18.
staffing. ET, right.
Yeah, so
Instructional
this
staff,
year,
right.
as we currently.
Full-time equivalencies, right.
Yeah, as we currently stand as a district, we are full-time 35 and a half less than we were in 24. But pre-COVID, it's about 18 and a half. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to
Yeah.
me. And class size, how much has that changed over that 5-year span?
So I don't have a ton of great class size data. I can tell you we leveled off class size going into this year. So you had a lot of disparity. Not a big change 4 through 12, but what you had was a lot of disparity between the 3 K to 3s. You might have had 11 or 12 at one school, and you had 20 to 22 at the other school. And we established class size parameters as a district at the K to 3 space at 18 plus or minus 2. So now they're all within that range. 4-5 is 20 plus or minus 2, et cetera. And we have standards that we use for staffing for budgeting now moving forward, that we used building last year's staffing and that we'll use to continue to move it forward.
And then if my understanding is correct, the time of day, the time of minutes we've had, instructional time of minutes has not changed until this year, and we've added 27 minutes.
Yes, and. So, pretty sure the high school's been consistent, because that's by statute, that it has to be 990 minutes. Tim's gonna have to help me here on exactly when they rolled it out at Wixon 2 years ago. Yeah, so the first phase was to add the time to the middle school so it would have been Mattakese and Wixon, would have been the first 2 schools, and I think it happened prior to moving in here. Yes. So they added the first phase was to add the 27 minutes to those 2 schools. Now
To
this
4,
school.
5, 6,
Yeah,
4, 5, 6, 7.
Yes, 4 through 7.
Okay.
And then this year is the first year adding the 27 minutes to K3 space.
So the 24 test scores reflected 27 extra minutes for the 4, 5, 6, 7.
Correct.
Grades.
A year plus of that. Yeah.
Okay, and so this year, the 25 scores will reflect 27 added minutes to the K3.
Correct.
Well, in 3rd grade, let's put it that way.
Yeah, 3rd grade, yeah.
All right. So if my understanding is correct, going into the testing cycle for the 3rd graders this year, staffing has remained virtually the same, with the exception of where was the emphasis in the reduction in staff over this year?
So we across the professional staff, so across the teaching staff, we leveled class sizes across the district. So there were some, so by example, I can't remember specifically what grade level it was at Station Ave. I know we had to add a teacher at Station Avenue in order to get the class sizes the same, but we made some class reductions at Emmy Small and Ezra Baker in order to get all those class sizes within that 18 plus or minus 2. And then we did again some reduction in our intervention staff to have our intervention staff match the research says that intervention staff should make up 15% of your staffing or supports 15% of your student population. So we made some reduction in intervention staffing. We also made some reductions at the high school based upon some of the caseload or some of the class sizes there too. We had under enrollment in several courses, so we made some reductions in some of the departments, or a reduction at a few different departments at the high school to get to level out some of the course enrollment at the high school. Those were the large across the professional staff, and then we had a list. I'd have to go back to give you all the specific details to where all the different 35. We had reduced an administrator. There was a SRO reduction in the budget. Again, I can't remember all the specifics.
Right, but
There was some
from an
paraeducators.
instructional
Yeah.
standpoint, we've maintained a fairly consistent baseline of instructional staff.
Yes.
And we've maintained less than number as far as support staff, but we've maintained our paraprofessionals, I guess I would call them. So we're less than paraprofessionals. Instructional staff is the same, and support staff, as in coaches, and that administrative group has remained consistent as well.
Yeah, our strategy was to focus on, we felt we were over supported in tiers 2 and 3 instruction, and that we really needed to focus on tier 1 instruction. So sort of going back to Tomas's question earlier, if I understand sort of where the question was going, instructional coaches support classroom teachers. Their main function is to support classroom teachers in their ability to be as effective as possible with students, right? So it's about indirect effect with students as opposed to direct effect to students. If we were to trade that coach for an interventionist, as an example, that interventionist could work with a certain number of students, let's call it 20 or maybe 30 kids, and would have direct support for those 20 or 30 kids. An effective instructional coach can work with all the teachers in the building, and if that effective instructional coach supports the helping each of those teachers improve even 5%, then they're now having an impact on every single student in that building. So that's why we decided not to cut coaches last year, because it was part of our larger strategy as a district. And then why we've invested in principal coaching, because principals have the same ability to raise the capacity and the efficacy of their teaching staff, which then has an impact on students. If they're able to support their teachers in order to help their teachers grow and flourish, then their teachers will be more effective with their kids and will have a larger impact on students.
Thank you. I'm just trying to find out the whys, and
Yeah.
Information is the best
Yep.
balm for what the wound is at this point.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm asking. Thank you.
I appreciate it, Ms. Kelly. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank
You did
you.
a wonderful job. And I believe next we have Ms. Mahady, and that's going to be for Emmy Small. So as everyone's finding that in their binder, and I'll first start off by thanking you for being here. As we pulled up to the building, there was nothing better to see than all of the families from Emmy Small entering the building and the performance next door. It's a great feeling to have those families here, and we in the future we'll talk about possibilities of them having a space they can enjoy too. So
Well, thank
more
you.
to come.
Thanks for that. If you don't mind, I'm going to just start with a couple of high points, and that is one of them. I want to just talk about tonight's concert in the beautiful performance space named after our esteemed colleague Ken, and to acknowledge our recent invitation to the eligibility for MSBA. And I think both of those achievements really speak to the Emmy Small community's dedication to giving our students and families the learning environments they deserve. We don't have a space large enough to host our families, so we got creative and we brought them to the best space we have, although we did all enjoy that walk to Matakees. And for the best part of a decade, we've been trying to get a petition through at MSBA, and that has finally happened. And as we look at this data, I want you to bear in mind that that same tenacity we intend to bring to our academic achievement. So this is our math trends. Last spring, we had a 14% increase among our students, meeting expectations on the math MCAS. It's the highest percentage of increase in the last 5 years, and it brings us closer to the rest of the Commonwealth. Not that that's good enough, as Tim said, we want to surpass that, but we are on the right path. In English language arts, however, the news is not so pleasant. A mere 24% of our students are meeting or exceeding expectations. Since I'm the third person going, when it gets into certain things that's already been explained, I'm going to spare you that time, okay? But feel free to ask me questions. This slide shows the gap, oops, I went too far ahead, sorry, between students on IEPs and students that are not on IEPs. And that gap's a little too large for my liking. In ELA, it's actually going up, and in math, it's going down a little bit. In your packet, there's a slide for IEPs, but I removed that because it's one student, and I did not feel like that was a good choice for us. We're looking at the students in low income in math and ELA next, and I want to give you the context that that is 65% of the ME small population. So that's a substantial number. And while I don't like the overall percentages, I am happy to see that we do not have a big disparity among those students who are low income and those who are not. Oops, I am really, Sam, want to help me here? I'm going the wrong direction. There we go. This slide, I just want to celebrate. This is our English language learners' performance over time, and we're quite proud of this. Our ELA scores for our English language learners is the highest in 5 years. And in math, we've actually eliminated the achievement gap. So I think it just speaks to our commitment to equity, and it shows that our attention to giving an equal experience to our English language learners is paying off.
Yeah, I'm noticing the same, that our slides in our packet are not.
That's because I made a mistake. I should have said that.
Okay.
I repeated the low income one again in your packet. So I will send you the corrected version.
Thank you.
You don't have the accurate information. This is our students grouped by race. This is, as people have struggled with before me, at ME Small we had 49 students take the English language arts test and 50 take the math. We had one student who was brand new to the country and therefore didn't have to take the ELA. The upside is that our Black and Hispanic students have had growth in both ELA and math in the last 2 years. This slide I am incredibly proud of. This represents students for whom their home language is something other than English. And for the first time in 5 years, our Portuguese, the students for whom Portuguese is their home language, have made it onto the chart for meeting or exceeding state standards. We want to work hard to increase that trajectory for all of our students. But it's, I feel like, a noteworthy accomplishment. This is our map, growth and achievement, looking at fall of last year and spring of last year. And in math, although this represents the entire school, it's interesting to see that the growth, 14%, is exactly what we had in our third grade math. So we're making strides in the right direction in math. Our literacy data spells out a need for improvement, and I will speak to that next. And one of the things that I wrestle with, and I'm sure the entire district does, is to balance the urgency for the students right in front of us to increase their achievement and the fact that change takes time. So we've paid deliberate attention to being as careful and specific with it and committed to impactful use of our student and teacher time. And here are some of the ways that we're doing that. In literacy, we have taken our additional 27 minutes, and the entire school, first thing in the morning at the same time, has a phonics, word study, and spelling block. At that time, the English as a second language teachers and the special needs teachers and the interventionists deploy themselves on a schedule into those rooms to support those students. Those lessons are then followed up when they are pulled out for English language development or if they're staying in the classroom for their ELA instruction. So it's a systemic school-wide approach, kindergarten through third grade, in some basic fundamental literacy and reading skills. And it is the time that our newer English speakers are in the same company as their English-speaking peers and learning the same things at the same time. We, much like our colleagues, are focusing on Tier 1 instruction. Given our population this year, actually 48% of the students in ME Small come from a home where the first language is something other than English. And to that end, we begin to work with our English language learners in our preschool program. We have, this is our third year. We had a one-year pilot, and then this is our second year with full implementation, where at each grade level are students who should receive 45 minutes of English language development do not leave their classroom. Instead, the ESL teacher pushes in and co-teaches during writing. Our monthly PLC meetings, as colleagues have mentioned, we have usually 4 in a month, and we have 3 focuses: literacy, math, and then looking at data and intervention. And we are very deliberate about those times. For example, our recent literacy PLC brought student work samples at each grade level. They looked at them against rubrics, and then they made plans for how they might lift that instruction going forward. We also began last year what I call collaborative clusters, and on our faculty meeting days, when we don't have a district initiative to attend to, we divide our staff by, they created the groups and then they choose which groups they belong to. We have one for our PBIS, another one that pays attention to how we support our English language learners in the full school community, classroom and beyond, and then our literacy leadership team. For math, I'm engaged in the math leadership coaching, and that has really, for those of you who know me, I was English teacher, English major, literacy coach. So this math hat, thanks to Krabali and Betsy, is fitting a little bit better. We have, as I mentioned, math PLC meetings, and in a math PLC, they look at the pre-assessment for an upcoming module, they look at the upcoming module, and they think about at a grade level where they need to pay attention. Again, we're focusing on Tier 1 instruction, and our collaborative cluster that focuses on our English language learners in our last meeting brought up looking more closely at English language development specific to math. So with the help of Kerbali and Betsy and the math coach, we're really digging into that. And again, learning academic language, a rising tide. It will lift all boats, but it's specific to that barrier that you mentioned earlier about language and math. And then in both ELA and math, we are really deliberate about our schedule. It's pretty much how I spend my summer. And to that end, every student has a 90-minute ELA block, 45 minutes for reading, 45 minutes for writing, and 60 to 70 minutes, minimum 60 minutes every day of math instruction. And also, I look at the grade level schedule so that there can be a special needs teacher that sees all students in the same grades, so all first grade teachers aren't having math at the same time if they need support in there. And that is kind of what my grandmother would call the fox, the chicken, and the bag of oats, and what goes over the fence first, and it takes a lot of thought and deliberation, and it looks very pretty on paper, but more than that, we keep lockstep with that. Classroom observations that focus on Tier 1 instruction, implementation of district curriculum, and grade level standards. This year, a huge shift for us, and this is really to the credit of Shannon Carlson, our assistant principal, is focusing on multi-tiered student supports and really looking at who needs our Tier 2 supports and looking at data once a month at PLCs. Along with our interventionists, students are for the first time really engaging in flexible intervention because it's very purposeful, and when that skill is met, they move on and someone else takes that seat. And I think that's it for me.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We'll start with Mr. New.
Thank you. So my first question is, does your demographic match Station Avenue, or is it different, percentage-wise?
I believe it's different. Mark, you want to look that up?
No, Mark doesn't. All right.
Yes, he does. I thought about doing it when you asked Valerie, and then I was like, I don't want to be the person looking down at my phone, so I didn't.
Oh, that's all right. Sometimes I look
Dr.
at the book
Smith.
rather than the charts over there.
So it's some slight differences. So again, last year's enrollment for ME Small, for the whole building, 14.2% identified as African American, 2.5% identified as Asian, 16.4% identified as Hispanic, 1.8% identified as Native American, 62.5% identified as white, and 2.5% identified as multi-race, non-Hispanic.
So it's not that much different.
No,
Not
it's
much.
really not.
Well,
It's
No.
close.
It's,
No.
it's, it's, it's
But-
fairly accurate.
But the percentages aren't, but the student enrollment's a difference of about
Yeah.
120
the numbers,
students.
right.
Some,
Right.
Yeah, and that's based on, yeah, right, correct.
All right, so. Wonderful increase from 23 to 24 in your math trends. Are there any best practices that you can identify that reflected that increase?
Yes, I think the Eureka Squared, this point 2.0, and the emphasis that we put on math, and I think there was a fresh curriculum and a real buy-in by the teachers at each grade level who'd piloted it the year before, so there was what we don't often find when we're bringing in a new curriculum, a real hunger, because their colleagues were so effusive about it. And then it gave teachers a chance to really be at the same point all together. And then, of course, our work with our math coaches and maybe a little bit of the leadership work with Corbali and Betsy, but mostly the teachers' hard work.
Thank you. And then I'm looking at the downward trend, 22, 23, 24 in the ELA. Anything that you can identify that is a cause of that? Because given that staffing levels are virtually the same, our demographics are kind of the same, and the cohorts potentially are the same, is there anything that you can identify that would result in this?
My working theory, and that's all it is, just my working theory, is that given our high percentage of English language learners, they have sometimes not had the same opportunities in terms, because they're learning a whole new language, but so early on, which is what spurred me to the phonics word study and spelling block altogether. So we'll see if there's anything to that theory, but because there's some experiences that are different, and that's what I'm thinking about, but I'm not sure.
All right. I'm just very interested in identifying the whys behind the test scores, and then if it's something that is a positive, let's find out why and replicate it. And if it's something that's negative, let's find out why and stop it or change it. So, all right, those are my questions. Thank you.
You're welcome, John.
Mr. Martin. Ms. Landers? Ms. Bemis?
For the 27 minutes of phonics, word study, and spelling block, what curriculum materials are you using?
So we are using our existing curriculum materials, the Fountas and Pinnell, word study, spelling, and phonics, which, when it was rolled into the 90 minutes, I'm not sure how much of the specific phonics was happening, so this is in addition to our readers and writers workshop. And to the point of scheduling and being a bit overbearing in the lockstep approach, every classroom is on the same lesson at the same time, because the special needs teachers and the ESL teachers need to be able to support that work when they have the students in another setting.
Thank you. To Mr. New's point about the percentages, and, it's just, for having almost, again, my numbers are fictitious or probably pretty accurate, 120 different less students than Station Ave. So when you look at those percentages, the number of people is high, for specifically the economically disproportionate. And it's important that we continue to look at, all of the different levels, whether it's race or economics, of how we're approaching. And, as much as maybe the numbers are similar school to school, I think it's great that the approach is different, because our student bodies are different. What need to be done is different. So it's good to see that we're individually looking at the data by school and making approaches towards what's best for our students. And every year it's going to change, right? So to Mr. New's point, something's going to work and you're going to do it again, and something's not going to work and you're going to change it. So it's just, every year we're going to still have these meetings, because every year we need to do better, right?
Right, and for the three of us elementary schools, we have to ensure that each of us in our own houses prepare students to move on together.
Right. They all need to be at the same starting point when they go to Mr. Blake at 4.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
as much as they're different, they all have the same expectations of where they end,
100%.
as all the fifth graders have the same expectations as they go into the middle school. Regardless of the same building or going from floor to floor, the
Exactly.
expectation in our curriculum is designed in a way that all students should learn the same things. And the discussion of Tier 1, our change of concentrating on the, I used to remember the pyramid. We used to talk about Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 when I first on the committee, and, working on the 3 is that, starting at Tier 1 and making sure all students are given the curriculum and, the specialist or interventionist versus the coaches, now two different words, now I have a better understanding of them, by working on the coaches, coaching the teachers to ensure the Tier 1 instruction, their better Tier 1 instructors will then affect all of the students below. So all the students will come up. It's all starting to, all these presentations are starting to make sense of what we're doing, and goes back to our, our district goals, and then our school goals. And in essence, our hopes is that we'll continue to help our scores go up, right? And, I know there's scores, but it's all about the education, that
Exactly.
our education,
Exactly.
that what we're teaching the students is the highest quality, and that all of our students are equitably learning, right? So
Right.
that regardless of what any of our K-3 schools, because they all have wonderful aspects of them, is that they're all starting and ending with the same information and prepared for, the rest of their 8 years after that. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And then I think we're ready for Mr. Deppen and Ezra Baker. We've been talking about Ezra Baker, and it's almost 90-year building.
94.
94.
Who's counting?
No one's counting? Oh, it was like hand-drawn crayon?
So good evening, everyone. We'll see if my plan worked. Tomas figured me out. So here's what you need to know about Kevin Deppen. I'm very competitive. So I'm going to speak the longest. No, I'm not. But I do watch a lot of food competition shows. So, and then you'll know, Marilyn, that when you watch food competition shows, if you can use the ingredient 2 ways, you get more points. And so tonight when you see some of the data, you'll see that I'm kind of showing the data in 2 different ways, and I hope to be clear, but I'll answer any questions, and stop me right in the middle if I start to ramble. Mark does all the time. How do I move my slide? No. Okay. This is So here's our MCAS ELA trends. And so if you look on the left, we look at the number or the percentage of students who are meeting or exceeding in the area of ELA. And you see that precipitous drop, and it's alarming. And I know I was alarmed when I saw that. And what that means, when we say our percentage of kids meeting or exceeding expectations, it's on the MCAS test. If their scaled score is 500, they either are at 500 or above, or they're 500 and below. So if you're at 500, you meet, and if you're below 500, you don't meet. And so only 32% of the 3rd graders last year at Ezra Baker met 500. And so I was really curious about that, and I wanted to look more. And so I started really digging into the data, and I started looking way over on the right. This is the same results, the same data, the same class, but we're not looking at what percentage met or exceeded 500. We looked at their average. So all the 3rd graders at Ezra Baker versus all the 3rd graders in Massachusetts. And what did the average of Ezra Baker versus the average in Massachusetts look like? And you see a different story. So I was curious. And so it's good news and bad news, right? So in 2023, if you look on the left, I was doing great. I exceeded state average. I'm like, all right, we've got it going on. But if you look at the right, you see that for the last 5 years of data, at Ezra Baker, we're always just hovering around where 3rd graders are in the state. Sometimes we're a little below, and sometimes we're a little above. And that's not to excuse the fact that between 2023 and 2024, we did drop in ELA, not quite as precipitously as the left graph would make it seem. And that's something that changes the way we think about our data and changes our action steps, which we'll get to later in the presentation. Okay. I blame the keyboard. So our math trends are a little different. So we didn't have much of a change between 2023 and 2024, but you see that we did exceed the state in the number of students who met that 500-point threshold. And if you look at our scaled scores on the right, again, we're slightly above the state in the average of all the third graders at Ezra Baker versus the average of all the third graders in Massachusetts. So we're slightly moving up in math. And then we start getting into our groups. Now, this is going to look different in your packet. Old Eagle Eye Sherry Santini noticed the graph that you had in your packet compared the state average versus the students at Ezra Baker on as identified learners on IEPs. This graph shows those students who aren't identified with an IEP versus the students who have an IEP in place or are identified in third grade. That was 19% of the third graders who took that test last year at Ezra Baker. And so you can see that there is a gap. The gap is slightly smaller, but that's only because overall we didn't perform as well in ELA. When you're looking first at those numbers of students who met or exceeded 500 points. Again, the second is still ELA, that second graph, and that is when we look at the average. So the average of students on IEPs versus the average of students not on IEPs is a little bit closer. Similarly, the very same is true in the area of math. The bottom green line, those students on IEPs in math, they're doing slightly better over last year, but just slightly, not quite as good as in 2022. And there's a large gap between the number of IEP students who met or exceeded standards versus the kids not on IEPs in math who did. And yet when you look at their average score, it's much closer. And so then we get into other groups, right? So these are students who are identified as low-income students. That was 62% of the third graders who took that test at Ezra Baker last year, 43 students, I believe. And excuse me. And so when you look at the achievement gap first in ELA, you'll see that the gap, I said to mind the gap, I minded it, but not quite as I would have wanted, because the students not low income, who don't identify as low income, had a bigger drop than the students who were low income last year. But again, whenever we're talking about low income and talking about Ezra Baker, most kids who took this test were low income students, 62% of them, of that grade. And again, the second graph, very same scenario you're going to see time and time again, that when we're looking at the average score for those kids, it is much closer than it would appear by the number of kids who are meeting or exceeding. In math, the trajectory is something we're much happier with. We see that our low-income students are going up, and then unfortunately those students not low-income students in math last year did have a little bit of a drop. And again, when you look at their average score, the very last graph there, they're neck and neck. They're almost there. So it would show that there's not much disparity between those two groups. So English learners. So English learners is a group in our district that continues to grow. At Ezra Baker, it continues to grow. And the majority of those students who identify as English learners at Ezra Baker are really levels 1 and level 2. So kids who have very little proficiency in English so far. They're growing in that, certainly. But we can see that in ELA, the number of students meeting or exceeding an expectation has been going down year after year. Again, these are different cohorts of kids with greater numbers of students. This present year, we have 88 English language learners at Ezra Baker. So it's a number that is growing. Their performance over time, when we look at their average scores, again, it's going down, but again, the gap is smaller. Math tells a different story, and this is a story we're seeing time and time again for the data at Ezra Baker. So in all of these subgroups, our students in math proficiency is going up, and again, the first graph is how many students hit 500 or above. The second graph is the average of the English language learners in math and the average of kids who are not English language learners in math. previews. Okay, students. Okay, so I kind of split these scores up. So again, these are the students grouped by race. We're looking at student performance by race. And again, on the left, by what percentage of students met 500. And on the right, the average of the kids who identify in each of those race groups. And again, we're seeing the same story, but it's kind of really important here, because on the left, the number of kids hitting 500, there's a disparity, certainly. White kids, and then Hispanic, then other, which is everything that's not Hispanic or black or white. And then our students who identify as black are at the bottom of that graph. When you look at the average of students who identify as Hispanic, students who identify as black, students who are other, or students who are white, you can see there's 3 of them that are almost at the same average score. And then the students who are black are slightly below that. But again, the gap is nowhere as great as that. And then this is the same information in the area of math. And so the left, we can see each of those groups by the number of students who met or exceeded expectations, 500. And on the right, we see, again, the disparity is very close. And we see that I may be colorblind, but I think it is my Hispanic students are actually outperforming each of the other races. And then we look at this information by first language students whose first language is not English and whose home language is not English. And so on the left, those students by Portuguese, other, and English. And we see that for the first time, just as Ms. Mahidi said, our students who are Portuguese speaking made the graph in 2024. And so we had a percentage of students who were meeting or exceeded expectations. And on the right, you can see when we look at the average of students, their averages are very close. So there's less disparity. So white kids, the average of all the white kids, if we had, I think it was 45 students who spoke English. And if we average those 45 and we had 6 students who spoke Portuguese and we get the average of those 6, like their averages are the same. And then the same information, but in the area of math. And we see with the percentage of students who were meeting or exceeding on the left and their average scaled scores, the average of how they performed on the right. And we can see that my highest performing on this graph in math were my Portuguese students, outscored students who were white and students who were other. And then on the left, again, you can see that those 3 average of those kids were much closer. So I looked at this chart. Everyone has been showing you MAP growth. So MAP is a different benchmark assessment. We give it 3 times a year in every grade, kindergarten, first, second, and third. I know we do 4th and 5th, and I don't know quite how high up it goes to. But I didn't pull what we did last year. I am sort of looking forward. So this is our live data for the fall of this year. And so you can see for in area of mathematics, for all grades, the Ezra Baker School is at the 62nd percentile. We're starting the year there. And for I broke it down by grade levels down below. So in kindergarten, they're at the 67th percentile, grade 1, 62, grade 2, 53rd, and grade 3, 69th. So that's sort of a metric, and forgive me if I'm mansplaining something, but so that meant if all the schools who took this test, if there were 100, as a whole in Massachusetts, as a whole, the Ezra Baker School would be score higher than 61 others, would be 62nd. And so that's, I have some interesting information because you probably can tell I'm a little bit of a data geek, and I got into this data as well. I'll talk a little bit more about it in a moment. If we look in the area of literacy or reading, it's really reading that they're measuring. As overall in the school, we were in the 61st percentile, but for kindergarten, 67th, 53rd for grade 1, 54th for grade 2, but 67th for grade 3. So that's really promising. NWEA has a high correlation to MCAS performance. And so we're encouraged by seeing that. Certainly, the idea with these charts is not to stay, this is just where we're beginning. We want to move everyone over into the green, everyone over into the blue. But it's where we're starting. Interestingly enough, 32% of the last year's third grade scored met or exceeded expectations on MCAS. That is exactly what NWEA predicted for them last fall. So that's prophetic, maybe, and it's also a challenge as the building leader to say, we should have grown that. If that's where they started in the fall, we should have grown that, and I wonder why we didn't. So my instructional focus, it's not like I'm less focused than everyone else, well, maybe, but you've heard a lot at this point. But we've been talking a lot about the extended minutes, and we took that very seriously at our level, getting the gift of 27 minutes. And what we did at Ezra Baker is we put those 27 minutes into the literacy block. And so previously, 90 minutes were allotted to literacy in every classroom. This summer, I planned it and blocked it out so that 2 hours, 120 minutes, were allotted to literacy. We talked about it as a faculty throughout the spring, and we really made a focus on writing. And so by that I meant we did a couple of things. We added a writing benchmark assessment. I heard that Mr. Blake did the same thing here at the intermediate school. So 3 times a year, every student is assessed on writing. Those are scored, and we make action plans for how to strengthen writing. We revamped our Tier 2 instructional practice. So we know that our focus is Tier 1, right? Strong classroom instruction for every learner, but some learners need more, about 15% of them. And previously, we would put a child and get them in Tier 2 instruction, and then even as they met their goals for that, we'd say, we're just going to keep you in there, Glenn, because, you know, we don't want to put you back and have you fall back, so we're just going to keep you for a longer amount of time. We've really changed that practice, and we've worked hard, because any time we're giving you a Tier 2, you're not accessing Tier 1. Or if you're accessing Tier 1, you're not getting independent practice time. And all of these other assessments are independent. So we want to make sure if you need Tier 2, we're going to give you what we need. We're going to give it to you for about 7 or 8 weeks. We're going to make sure you got it, and then we're going to send you back. And if you need something again, that's great. But we're really going to be very focused with what we're working on. So you get to this other one, so many words. Deepened understanding and strategic use of benchmark assessment information. So it sounds very scholarly, and I'm not sure I am. But what I did learn from looking at the NWEA, that MAP assessment, is there are so many reports. And if you're a data geek, you look at all of them. And they do this one report that's a quadrant. And if you score in the 50th percentile, you're high growth and high achievement. And when you're the building principal and you see that Maryland is high growth and high achievement, I'm not worried about you, right? That's great. You're high growth. You're high achievement. You're going to do just fine. And then we'd take the MCAS and find out that we didn't. So if you go through tons of reports, you can find that, well, that's a little different for every state. And we have a state with very high standards and a very hard MCAS test. And so if you really want to be high growth and high achievement in Massachusetts, you have to be at the 65th percentile. So what we discovered is that there's a group of kids who scored 50 and not quite 65, and we think they're doing great, but they're not going to meet or exceed on MCAS. So we have to look at those kids. And I'm not saying they all get a Tier 2 intervention, but those kids are like, in my classroom, I'm really going to watch out what's happening there, because they're strong-ish, but they're not exactly where they need to be. And those, honestly, were kids we were really not looking at before. We were looking at those kids who were below 50. And that's in both math and reading. And like all of my colleagues, increased observation and feedback. And accent, if I could have bolded this, I would have accented on the feedback, because we're observing all the time, both informal observations in the classrooms, what we see, but it's giving teachers that feedback that they can use. That's not like, oh, you did this or you didn't do this, but like, hey, this is how this can be, your teaching can be strengthened. And so that's really, really important. And it's very much the same in math. Everyone has talked about our math coaching, but only I can say that. I've been a principal longer than forever, 29 years. And I've never been involved in coaching like I have been in these last 2 years. It's very challenging, frightening at times. Not the person, just the expectations. But it's been very important. And although it's in the area of math, it has also changed the way that I approach my observations in literacy. One of the things that maybe smarter principals do is they have the curriculum. So when I go in to watch your math lesson, I have the curriculum, and I'm like, oh, you did that, but you should have done this. And now when I go into literacy lessons, I say, hey, what lesson is that? And I go back and say, oh, all right. So again, it's not like people aren't teaching the curriculum, but there's like something often you can point out, like, you did this part of the lesson great, and you skipped this part of the lesson. And, teachers say, I know that, I ran out of time. But, so it's really informed feedback, and I see it making a difference in daily instruction. This is our second year with Eureka Math Squared, and as we see, for example, one of the things that the curriculum did is they tried to simplify language for English language learners and for kids maybe who have a language processing difficulty, and we see that difference in some of the scores. I want to think that some of the upturn in scores was because of this new curriculum. Again, I'm looking at that benchmark assessment information and really making sure that I know what it's telling me, and that I can help teachers know what it's telling them. And then, of course, increased observation and feedback. So that is the story. I did not speak longer. I did give you the information 2 ways, and I'm happy to take any of your questions.
Thank you
Unless
so
you're
much
all
for
done.
stepping. Start with Mr. New.
Thank you. Thank you for the charts and looking at it 2 ways. And so the 50% versus the 500, it's beneficial for somebody like myself to see that. And so what do you attribute your school achieving that 500 mark so consistently? Are there best practices? What are you looking at as an administrator that says, okay, we're doing fairly well with this?
So, again, I have a lot of answers to that. So we didn't achieve the 500, and so the meeting and exceeding.
I know
that's
you
the
didn't
500.
achieve it, but you're
But we're approaching it.
correct.
And so what that says to me as an administrator, and what I've really been thinking about, is like, it becomes a very different game plan. So when I saw that precipitous drop, I'm like, what happened? Did we forget how to teach literacy? What happened? And then when I look at it the other way, I think to myself, this is really a game of inches. I think that's a sports metaphor, but I'm not a very sporty person, so I don't know. So it's making sure you make the most of each day, for example. It's making sure that we're not doing, I mean, I love recess, but we're making sure that we're not squandering that extra minutes. It's like 1 question or 2 questions for a few kids, and those numbers jump up. So it's really holding the expectation high. For me, making sure that teachers understand what a 3rd grade piece of writing should look like. Because it's easy to lose sight of that. You have a class in front of you and they perform a certain way, and you adjust your expectations for the class that has in front of you. And it's like we always have to keep like, this is what 3rd graders need to do. This is what kindergarten students need to do. We do a lot of talking about sheltered English immersion strategy. So that's like what every teacher can do, not the EL teachers, but you have students whose first language is not English in your classroom. There are ways that you can make this material accessible to them. And we all learned about it, but now we talk about it a lot more because it's important for people to know that there are things we can do every day to make those changes. And they're little things. It's not like, it's making sure you have a strong lesson plan in front of you. It's just important, like every move matters.
So another question, observation, evaluation, assessment are all critical tools in helping the person delivering the curriculum to have available to them, somebody to do that for them. How many contact hours, how many contact days between you, the coaches, other administrators, curriculum supervisors, how often is a faculty member, the person delivering the curriculum, how often are they assessed as to their ability to deliver the content?
Right, so it varies probably for individuals. So there's a certain amount of time each day, but if you're newer to the field, so you're in your first few years of education, I've probably been in your classroom 3 times already. If you're someone who's been there for, 20 years and it gets good results, I've probably been in once so far this year. And so it varies by the need of the professional. There's sometimes people are struggling with something, and that's just my observation. Coaching cycles happen all the time, both in math and literacy.
Are they on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, the coaching?
Again, I think it varies by individual teacher, but they are on a regular basis. And
Do you feel that the
expectation is-
coaching is an important and valuable tool within, the context of helping the teacher deliver the curriculum better?
Absolutely, because this is hard work. Like, these teachers are working hard, and everybody thinks their level has it the hardest, but I'm telling you, elementary teachers have to be good at everything all day long and keep track of everybody's coat and lunch money. No lunch money, but lunch box. And so they're working hard, and they need someone to help them see the way, because they know what they have to do, but depending on any set of circumstances, it can seem almost impossible to get there.
And then, so looking at the data you provided, there's a definite drop-off, grades 1 and 2. Kindergarten and third grade level, your charts, achievement is exceptional. But then grade 2, grade 1, there's a drop-off. What do you attribute that to?
No. I'm getting dysregulated, I'm sorry. No, I think, the strength of our curriculum, we have a very challenging curriculum. Our kindergarten kids, they knock it out of the park. We have, they've done very, very well. I just want to point out that if I looked at those numbers last year and I said that they were above 50%, I'd be like, they're doing great. They're in, wow, they're 53. That's better than half the country. But it's not good enough for Massachusetts. And so I just think it's very challenging. These kids are little. They're 6 years old. We have high expectations for them, and we just have to keep working to get them there.
So my last question, have you been doing this type of assessment on a yearly basis over the many years that you've been an administrator here in the district?
They hadn't invented assessment when I started. But so certainly no. We've been doing the NWA. I think this is maybe our third year. 2020-21 was our first. All right, so 2020. And we've always done different assessments, and these are benchmark assessments, right? We're expecting that in every classroom, every week, if not every day, assessment is happening. Teachers are taking reading records or running records of students' performance. There are every day in math just about an exit ticket, which tells you did they get this lesson or they didn't. They have topic tests and module tests or like chapter tests. So there's a lot of assessment that is going on. These assessments give me a chance to look at the whole school under sort of the same testing conditions.
Well, I think your accountability is a huge piece of what we do, I think, in education, or what you do in education. And I think this is a way to provide us with data that gives us that type of assessment. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Mr. Martin. Ms. Landers. Ms. Bemis. I just have some things to go over. Everything, I won't necessarily have questions for you. One of it is, from listening to the district strategic goals, there's been a lot of conversation about Tier 1, which I talked about earlier, and more emphasis on the increased observation and feedback, and you all talked about it,
Right.
as did the other ones. And I think it's been from what I'm hearing, it's been a great opportunity for the administrators in all the levels, the assistant principals, and it has put more, levels of what's going on in the classroom, right? We do have people that have been there 20 years and some that are newer, but we're still going in there, and to your point of, pointing out, constant feedback is needed, making sure they're at the same point as their other teachers are, and making sure that we continue to do that. And it just seems that the goals that were set over the summer are really coming into play. And, I'm hopeful, but again, I'm hopeful every year, and scores don't always turn out as we hope because students are different every year. But we just need to constantly see what we can do. And then, the NWEA, we talked about, the map testing. I love this testing because there's instantaneously results. You get 3 times a year. You have results that you can react on. Yes, they project what MCAS could be, but you can target what you're doing from the fall ones, in the winter, in the spring. It's not that MCAS is taken, and by the time the results are there, the student is someone else's teacher,
right.
or worse, another building, and it's backtracking what was missed. You know, this stuff is instantaneously in the year, so, you know, that adaption, the adoption of that is definitely something that I think has been a benefit to the district, and I'm hoping will continue to be something that we can constantly look at to see where, in the year, for the year, what we need to do. You know, and things that we've talked about before, I know we started with the high school, and not a lot of great news with our scores, but what we constantly read about and have learned about is how important that third grade is. And, you know, a lot of the things we read about how important our literacy needs to be in that K-3 and how that will affect the graduation rate 7 years later. The 10th grade test, or, you know, the graduation in grade 12, and how important it is that we take the time, because if we miss it in this young age, it's starting to be too late by 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and if they haven't gotten it by 5th, because we missed it earlier, it's going to really start showing. So, you know, we appreciate all that's done at all the levels, but it's just, you know, where we're putting the focus at each grade level to ensure that we're covering them through their whole time with us, right? And it's the pre-K, right? So we have 2 schools in our district that are pre-K to 3. So we have even younger students that we're working on. And as Ms. Mahady talked about, you know, starting with them, with their families and their understandings of things to help prepare them when they are into the kindergarten level. And it'd be perfect if we had the space to have more pre-K. I know that would be something that would be amazing. I know we're not there, and I don't know if we'll ever get there. But the fact that we have that opportunity to have that is a great thing, and it's something that we hope to continue so that we can start earlier in that education. So thank you to all of the administrators today and over the last couple of weeks. And Dr. Smith, anything before I move forward, or I know it's a lot?
I think the only thing that I would say is just really just to echo, I think it was something Ms. Mahady said, which, and it really just something that I said after the last round of presentations, which is, you know, that change does take time. And just to reiterate something that you were just saying, which is that what I see from my seat is a lot of aligned effort. You know, these aren't just presentations for the sake of the committee. This is also very much aligned to the work that I see going on in their buildings. That's aligned with the work that I see going on in central office day to day. And, you know, it's all built on our theory of action, which is really centered in our strategic plan. And it's really the work that we believe is going to turn. And I think you see the math data is trending in the right direction, and that is really sort of a microcosm. That's last year, while we were really spending a lot of time together as a leadership team learning each other and learning and diving deep into the district. That's sort of the one place that we did some real kind of focused work at K-5. And now we're expanding that strategy across the district, and you see some of the early signs of success there. And so not only are we just hopeful, right? We're not just like, I don't know, foolishly optimistic. I believe there is some data that's suggesting that we are on the right path. We have the right strategy, and now I think to a couple things Mr. New said earlier is, you know, not only do I think it's just common sense a good strategy, but there's actually a lot of research to support it. You know, look for the bright spots, right? Find the things that are working well, and then how do you replicate those? So I think we've seen some signs that the strategies that we're using, but that we used at K-5 to support math, are showing us some positive signs. It was showing up in the MAP data at the end of the year last year, so I was glad to see it also replicated in the MCAS data. And now how do we expand not only within mathematics, but how do we push it across the other subject areas? And that's sort of been the focus of this beginning part of this year.
Thank you. And then the last only comment I'll have is that I've appreciated the work that the teams have done together. I've seen more teamwork between grade levels or grade building leaders between buildings together, working on projects that you've assigned or that they're working on for presentations like this, or things in the beginning of the year so that their presentations are the same, but getting them to work together throughout the district has been a good thing to see as well, so thank you. Next thing we have is the School Committee Liaisons to Board of Selectmen. Anything from the town of Dennis? Town of Yarmouth did have an additional special town meeting last week in this building for 2 items, and then Board of Selectmen had some discussions that we'll talk about further on that Ms. Mahady mentioned already about the MSBA, so we'll bring that up later. Cape Cod Collaborative, Mr. Morris was unable to attend, so we will push that off to our January 6th meeting. School Building Committee.
All right, so a little bit of an update, which to give a little bit of context for the motion that we're hoping to get from the committee. So, we've been reporting a little bit in brief sections to the committee that we've been working, here, let me back up a little bit further. So the committee authorized David and I a while ago to put out an RFS for design for the field project. So again, just for the edification of the public, for the couple of people that might still be watching, yeah, they're all asleep, right? That might watch later on the recording. The fields are not working the way that they were designed to work, and so we need to repair and replace the fields, and we have a separate legal issue working. We're working that through a separate legal channel. But we also need to make sure the fields are operating in the way that that the school district wants and that they were originally intended. So essentially, the water is not draining through them. So we had the school district put out we were authorized to put out an RFS to get a new design. So that design was created, and the original process was we were going through the existing general contractor for the whole project. So. And they were then seeking subcontractors to do the site work. So last couple of times we've been reporting was we'd gotten subcontractor bids and we were working with the general contractor. They're going through this process called leveling sheets where they get it and they try to get all the prices to match. And quite frankly, we just weren't really comfortable with where the pricing was coming in. And we kept trying to work through the contractor, through the subcontractors to get the pricing better, and we didn't feel like it was in the best, or we don't feel like it's in the best interest of the district to continue down this path for a couple of reasons. One, we don't feel like it's the best pricing. Two, that should we find ourselves in some type of a legal battle down the road, that we properly have done our due diligence, and that could leave the district vulnerable. And that's really kind of the 1 and 2. Those are really kind of the two heavy lines. So then through internal conversations plus conversations with our OPM, so that's PMA, they're the owner's project manager, trying not to use too many jargony terms, that our recommendation is to take that project and put it out to general bid. So we would get an entirely new general contractor that would do this project. We believe we'll be able to get better pricing because we're not going through our general contractor to a different contractor. Essentially you're getting markup when it's coming back to you that way. And that was the third piece. The third piece is the subcontractors that are coming back to us don't have as much expertise in specifically building turf fields as we believe we're going to get interest if we just put it out to general bid. So those are 3 reasons why. 1, pricing. So I guess really just, 1, pricing. 2, to protect the district should we find ourselves in a legal challenge on did we do enough due diligence and enough due process to find the best price. And 3, to try to attract some more contractors who have a longer history in this specific type of construction. Am I missing anything?
No, that's really it. And just further the Nezra Engineering, our designers, they were trying to dig into why were we not getting some more competitive bids as a subcontractor through Commodore on this project, and kind of hearing off the record that companies who do this for a living, meaning install fields, this is primarily their business that they do, quite honestly didn't really want to be a subcontractor of somebody else. Like if you bid this and it's our project, like we do 95% of our other projects, whether it's at a college, university, high school, yeah, we'll bid the project. Oh, you want us to do it as a change order, as a subcontractor to a big general contractor who had another site contractor do work. They didn't want to be, the third or fourth cog in the wheel. So on the advice of the owner's project manager and the designer, and quite honestly talking with the legal counsel, are we doing our due diligence, making sure we are getting the best pricing, because if it ends up in court someday, we want to be able to prove to the court and the lawyers that this is a fair price, that we didn't just take a price off the shelf and have an inflated price. And by doing this, it can be the design that we want and potentially get a subcontractor that, again, this is what they do for a living. And we felt we've gone this far down the road. We're in December. This is going to add a few more weeks at this point, which a few more weeks if it's going to get us the contractor who can do the job at a better price.
Thank you. Looking for a motion.
I move to authorize the district to publicly bid the repair replacement of the turf field at DYIMS as its own separate project.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay. Do we need a roll call vote, or can we do a no roll call? So all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstained? Motion carries. Next, we have a policy subcommittee, first reading.
Okay, I'm doing DJA. What's different about this is, again, it's going to say regional school district in the title. The first couple of sentences are sort of just clarifying and revising, and the last two sentences are new. Here's how it reads. Authority for the purchase of materials, equipment, supplies, and services is extended to the superintendent through cost-centered appropriation as part of the district budget process. The purchase of items and services within the cost center appropriation requires no further committee approval except when by law or by committee policy. New. Contracts may be entered into for a period of up to 3 years. Contracts of longer duration may only be entered into by vote of a duly called school committee.
Excellent. So that's the first reading, and then we have any questions on that?
Yeah, is that an MSBA recommendation to do the 3-year?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? We have another first reading for another policy.
Yes, this will be for a brand-new policy, filed KDCB, district website and social media. Reads as follows. The school committee wishes to ensure accurate delivery of information, and as such, the Dennis-Yarmouth Regional School District will maintain a district website and such district and school social media accounts as authorized by the superintendent. All such online platforms will be maintained by district staff acting in their professional capacities. In order for public communication with the school committee and district personnel to be responded to in a timely manner, in line with the legal requirements for public communication, commenting on all district and school sites will be turned off. Every school and district site will clearly indicate this policy and will direct those wishing to contact the school and district personnel to use the appropriate venues to do so. Unauthorized use of district or school name is prohibited. A high priority will be placed on such platforms being accessible, frequently updated, and user-friendly.
Great. Again, this is a first reading. Any questions? The source on this says it does come from the Mass Association of School Committees on this, so it's a recommendation from them as well.
Yeah, and I can just add a little context. And this was brought by our new communications and community relations staff member, and tied to both our strategic plan and tied to one of the superintendent's goals around consistent policies, procedures, et cetera, and identifying that we don't have a social media policy. And in doing some of her work, she's noticed that, as an example, there are several social media accounts that exist out there that are utilizing the DY logo, utilizing DY name, et cetera. And so this would give us the policy cover to then establish some guidelines for how we operate as a district. There's some specific things laid out there that will have our district page have the comments shut off, but then also sort of there's the line in there around the authorization, sort of who, unauthorized use is prohibited. So then we will then put some procedures and sort of regulatory pieces in on a process for requesting use of the DY logo and name, and how we track and monitor who's out there using the DY name on social media, et cetera. So this gives us the policy cover to allow to place procedural safeguards in place for the district from a communication standpoint, along with other things. But
Ms. Landers.
So there are a lot of sites, I mean, mostly in my world, right, Facebook pages and groups that use the district name and school names. So, I'm just curious what the conversations have been around enforcement of this policy and how onerous this is going to be or not on our staff to regulate these, and how proactive they intend to be on going out and searching out these pages, and what the protocol will be for trying to enforce this.
so, again, so working with Leela, it's been a conference. She's already started to search out and find, a significant number of them. Some are, people, well-intended people doing good stuff.
Yeah,
Some of
I
them,
have an alumni,
Right.
DY alumni page.
Right, yeah.
With like thousands of people in the group,
Right.
and it's
So part of it is just, us knowing who are the person, having contact information for the person, and having author. So we're gonna have to sort of work backwards to all the existing pages. Who's the moderator of the page? Are you, again, are you using official DY name, logo, et cetera? And if you are, have you been authorized? And then who's the contact person for that page? If it's being run by a student, we need, we talked about a policy piece, like who's the sort of faculty advisor that we're going to attach to that piece, and then sort of some policy guidelines, or not policy guidelines, policy's your realm, some procedural guidelines or sort of expectations, right? So if you're going to use the DY name, here's what we expect, because this is what it means to represent DY wherever you're going. It's not going to be the Wild Wild West. And so, like, if you want to use the DY name, then you got to, live to these standards, so to speak. And so first we'll be communicating with everybody who's currently using the DY name, and then go from there. And then anybody new who wants to, then there'll be this request process.
and so this is a sample policy from MASC.
Yeah. That's straight
and
from, that policy is straight from MASC.
Straight from
yeah.
MASC. So obviously been vetted in terms of constitutional issues, freedom of speech, all of that, right? Interesting.
Yeah, and I think, we'll have a lot of control of what individual student groups and staff members are utilizing. I think a lot of it, was looking at that, and then, the things that are unaffiliated with us. But, I think, a lot of focus has to be put, will be first on what's affiliated with us and what's being posted by our by our staff members and student groups, and then, going from there, right? I think making sure we're consistent on what we're doing as a district, and then go from there. But
Yeah, and there's a difference between a parent's page that's loosely connecting itself to us versus, I'm not trying to pick, I don't want to pick any one particular group out here. So a group that is, there are several pages right now that are literally using our logo and are tied to one or more than one of our schools, using our school address, but are run not by a faculty member, or are run by a faculty member but is not run officially by the school, right? So it's like getting our hands wrapped around all of that. Like I'll put myself out there. I have a DY superintendent Twitter page, right? So like I should have to go through this process just like everybody else, because if I'm going to put myself out there as officially representing the district, I should have to follow the same guidelines as everybody else. But there is no policy that says that that's even a thing right now. That there are expectations and that there has to be an approval process for representing DY out in cyberspace. That anybody can say that they're DY. Right now, Tomas could start a page and say that he's DY High School if he wanted to, and we don't even have a policy that says he can't.
I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I think the first step is if this policy moves forward and is approved, that Lee will have plenty of work cut out for her. Any other questions? Perfect. These are first readings, so there's no vote on this. Next, we have our Finance Subcommittee. The Finance Subcommittee met prior to this meeting. The two topics that we discussed today were the 2025 budget update. We discussed where the fiscal year 25, the current year we're in, is trending, and there's currently no specific items that we're over or under in. We pretty much seem to be on target. Obviously, things aren't billed or money received monthly like in other businesses. Things come in quarters and lumps, but from what David said, there's nothing that we foresee to be outrageous or under or over in any particular area. I worded that correctly. Thank you. I won't make you speak, David. And then the next one, we talked about our preliminary budget projections. We've discussed budget numerous times, a lot earlier than we have in the past. We've already had several discussions with towns. The number, has changed from September 1 to today. Looking at some of the items, it's a hundredth of a percent difference. But again, we're still talking about a little over, $3 million difference from September 1 to now, as we're looking at where we are. But again, as we all know, nothing is really definite yet, and we won't have anything until the governor's projections, which will be in January. So a lot more discussions to happen. We have talked the last meeting, about our upcoming budget dates that we have on our calendars, so more to discuss on that. Dr. Smith, anything I missed?
Just that we'll have our first full committee presentation at the next meeting on January 6th.
Perfect. And now moves into the superintendent's report.
All right, thank you. So there are a couple of items that that came up kind of last minute over the last bit of time that are not on the agenda, so I will be adding a little bit to the superintendent's report here. So starting with acknowledgements, unfortunately I really need to start with acknowledging a significant loss in the district. Over the weekend, the district experienced a significant loss. On Saturday, DY High lost a student, Jillian, better known as Jilly Andres, passed away. Jilly's been a student here in DY for nearly 2 decades, starting with us at the age of 3. During her time here in DY, she had many personal and deep connections with several staff, And all those that worked with Jilly had a very deep and personal connection and were enriched by the experience of knowing Jilly and having Jilly in their presence. She'll be dearly missed. I was able to meet with the staff and students that most closely work with and spend time with Jilly now at the high school, and it was evident from that meeting how much Jilly meant to them. And there were definitely tears, there were some smiles, and rethinking and reliving some of their favorite memories. There was a fair amount of Taylor Swift being played. Apparently that was Jilly's favorite music. And I just want to say that our hearts, our thoughts, and our prayers go out to the entire Andres family as they navigate this tremendous loss. And we offer our deepest condolences as a district, as fellow parents, as fellow caregivers, and just as fellow humans. It's a terrible loss, and I can't imagine not only just the loss, but the time to be experiencing this loss. So as a district, our thoughts are with them. There's no segue from that, but trying to segue from that, we want to thank, there are some donations, or a donation that we want to thank. I want to thank Miss Deborah Benassi for a generous donation to the middle school. She donated 2 Bose headphones to the DY Middle School, which will go a long way to supporting students within the district. On the agenda, there is, and Ms. Mahady mentioned Emmy Small. So as she mentioned, on Friday, the district was officially invited by the MSBA board into the eligibility period. Our eligibility period officially begins on April 1st, 2025. And that'll start our clock for 270 days. You all have in your packet some more detailed information on what the eligibility period involves and what the specific steps are that the district will have to go through. Some of us on the staff, myself, David, our facilities director, Ms. Mahady, will be attending a training early next week to get more details on the eligibility period. But big picture, the big couple of steps on there, a lot of it's paperwork stuff and meetings that we'll have to attend, but a couple of the big steps is we'll have to form a building committee. So I'll be, I'm planning at the end of this week to have a press release and to talk and to sort of get the word out and at least plant the seed about a building committee, and then I'll have a process a little bit later about that. And then the other big piece will be getting local authorization for funding for the feasibility study, because that's the next phase, is the feasibility study. But we'll have to get funding for the feasibility study. And so that really sort of leads to, I think, something for the committee to be thinking about. And Tomas mentioned that the Yarmouth Select Board did discuss this a little bit, because the town administrator, I had invited the town administrator to come to the meeting on Friday, so he had let the select board know. And I think, we're obviously going to have to, this is a Yarmouth specific project based upon the way the regional agreement is constructed. And I think it might be a good idea for the committee to think about some type of a joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen fairly early in this process to discuss the process. I know that they expressed some interest in that, or at least a couple of the select board members did. If that's something that the committee is interested in, I can start to work with the town administrator to organize that. And if you all want to discuss sort of what that agenda might look like, or I'm happy to take direction on that. I'm happy to pause here for questions. I've got a couple other items, but I don't know if you want me to get all the way through the report or pause here for stuff on ME Small or move forward.
Jenny?
We definitely, at some point, will need a joint meeting with the Yarmouth Select Board. if we do it too soon, there's just too many unanswered questions.
Yeah.
So once you have sort of critical mass of information from MSBA, then I would definitely support a joint meeting.
All right, moving forward. So the next is the competency determination. So a couple of meetings ago, I mentioned that we had the passing of, I already forgot which ballot question it was, 2 maybe? So the Department of Ed released on the 11th, so I think that was last Wednesday, some updated guidance. And then on the 13th, the Superintendent's Association, the State Superintendent's Association retains legal counsel, so the legal counsel provided an opinion on what the Department of Ed had released, and the new guidance is going to require both the school district and the school committee to take some action, and we're going to have to take some fairly quick action because we have to put some things in place for the class of 2025 when we do not have a lot of runway. And we're going to have to develop a plan, we're going to have to communicate that plan, and we're going to have to implement that plan all for our students who have to graduate this spring. And so I don't have a ton of details for you, but I can share with you what I'm pretty confident that I do know. So what I'm pretty confident, or what I do know based upon the guidance and the interpretation of that guidance by legal counsel is the following. That the CD and the local graduation requirements are not the same thing under the interpretation of the law. So we can't just say, we'll use our local graduation requirements as the CD. So that's not, those two cannot be the same thing. We also cannot decide, we can't decide to use the MCAS, right? So there was a question like, oh, well, can the school district just decide to vote to use the MCAS test? No, legal counsel believes that that would be violating the spirit of what the ballot question was, and that it would really position the school committee to be challenged legally, and I think that makes a lot of sense. The CD must, and this is what's written in the law, is that the CD must, quote, show mastery of the skills, competencies, and knowledge contained in the state academic standards and curriculum frameworks in the areas measured by the MCAS in the high school test described in Section 1 administered in 2023. So we have to have a system that shows competency in the math test and the ELA test and the science test from 2023. So those specific standards. So we can't be just sort of, did you pass English? It's got to be like something specific to those specific areas. We also need a process, and then the process, whatever process we come up with, will need to be approved by this body. So I'll get to the next steps in a second, but, and then as another fun layer is we're going to have a process for graduates who feel that they have met whatever process we come up with, but didn't earn their CD under the old system, to be able to come back and for us to determine under our new process, do they get the CD even though they didn't get the CD under the old process, which involved the MCAS, if everybody's following that one. That one's a little clumsier. There's no guideline on how many years. I would say since maybe the MCAS as a CD was put in place, question mark. So what's next? Yeah. So next steps is I already have a meeting scheduled for when we get back from vacation with high school leaders, including the department heads, specifically those that are in the content areas most affected, curriculum directors, Maria and myself. And so what we'll do on our side is work on developing a sketch of a plan, or really developing a plan, because then we need to get that in front of you all ASAP. Because you'll need time to review the plan, discuss the plan, either vote to approve that plan or send us back to make revisions to that plan. And we need to get all that moving in enough time, because I think what I failed to mention is, or I think I failed to write down to myself, is not only we need to communicate the plan, we have to have it available in multiple languages. So like we're going to need to get it out. And like it obviously has to have enough time for, like, let's just say I'm going to make something up right now, like that we determine that's a particular course, like a 10th grade course, that's a linchpin to getting your CD, because that's the one that we determine passing that one is one that meets one of the requirements of the CD. And we have a kid who graduated, who's going to graduate this year, and didn't pass that course. So then what's the process? Or is there a process? Or are they just out of luck? I don't know. Like, those are all sorts of things that we got to figure out in very short order. Because, again, it can't just be their graduation requirement where we just say, yeah, you got all your credits. That always was in place. This has to be something separate than that, that meets the same level of this CD. So again, more to come, and that's what we're going to be working on internally as a team. All right, next. So I'd shared with the committee in the email on Friday, and this ties back to all the presentations today. So we've seen pretty consistent decline over the last couple of years in our ELA data, and the committee is aware, because I shared with you in an email, and the general public may or may not be aware, that there was a lawsuit filed in Massachusetts against two major curriculum developers, Fountas and Pinnell and Lucy Calkins. And Fountas and Pinnell happens to be the literacy curriculum that we utilize as a district in K to 5. So, you know, I've gotten a couple emails from parents questioning, you know, our use of this resource as a district. And so what I guess what I would say is we have a plan, and we had a plan in motion to address. So I don't want this to be as if we're responding to the lawsuit. However, I do feel like it's necessary as a district to make sure we're communicating out at this point. I had a plan for communication, and this is accelerating my plan for communication. So I want to give a little bit of context and sort of tell you about what's coming next. So prior to the news of the suit, we had begun work as a leadership team. The committee may remember one of my goals was to analyze barriers to early literacy. So, and this was really focused on the trend in the data, had seen the trend in the data, and wanted to figure out what some of the challenges to that might be. And so I had started earlier this year by pulling K-5 principals together and appropriate central office staff that support that same range of students, or the same age range of students. And we had started to dig into our data. We'd begun evaluating our existing curriculum resources. We started to establish some common values and expectations for what we wanted to see in a literacy program. And we were doing all that work, and then the news broke around the lawsuit. So that kind of accelerated our process, and it's getting late, and I want to give this the amount of time that it deserves and be conscious of the time. But just from a change management standpoint, like it's important to me to make sure to to do change right. So I was working to try to bring everybody and bring consensus among the leadership team before working out to a larger scope. Then, like I said, the story broke. So it's really kind of accelerated my change process with the leadership team. And so Sherry and I had a conversation, Sherry Santini, Director of Humanities, and I had a conversation, and we're really going to sort of now accelerate. I had a superintendent say to me a long time ago, never waste a good crisis. So this has created an opportunity to move the change process forward a little bit faster. And so our plan was, and now will continue to be, and again, just moving the communication of it forward a little bit faster, to put together a larger team now to investigate the appropriate, or investigate a new curriculum resource for us as a district. Now, I think it makes best sense to put this team together late winter, early spring. This team will be made up of a wide spectrum of teachers that are representative of the K-5 space, or representative of the different folks that impact reading instruction, as well as key leaders across that space. And they'll work, so part of this too is like, I think, or as you know in the strategic plan, part of the second strategic objective is all around consistent processes as a district. So we just created a curriculum resource adoption process. There wasn't really a clear curriculum resource adoption process in place prior to maybe 4 months ago. So I think you and I have had this conversation before at previous meetings. It's like all these things seem disparate, but they're also really connected. So we put, this team will follow that new process, and it's meant to be a thorough process to ensure that we have a resource in place that will meet the needs of our kids, that's rigorous, that's standards aligned, et cetera. So this team will work through the spring, and by early next fall, we'll be ready to make a recommendation and a decision on what is the best resource for us. That is so that then the leadership team can take that decision and start to work on an implementation plan and be ready by the FY27 budget process, because this will not be a small ticket item, but from a budgeting perspective. We'll then be able to come to you all with a couple of funding options. So, here's what a full K-5 one-time implementation looks like with all the training, because we have learned things about the training from the math, about what's needed to really do a proper implementation. And there's the resource adoption, like the purchase of the stuff is one thing, and all the training and support, there's some that we can do in-house and there's some that we need help with. And that has a cost with it too, right? So, they'll be sort of, here's the all in, we do it all in 1 year cost. And this is sort of what I've mapped out with Sherry. We do it over 2 years, we do it over 3 years. And lay all that out, because like I said, there is a budget impact. So that is where we sort of stand on that process. And I think that's everything. But there is a plan. There was a plan. It got accelerated a little bit. And then I guess the last bit is I will, because I don't assume everybody's going to be watching this. I'm planning, I was going to do an internal description of this to the entire faculty. My plan was to get it out today. Then we had we had Jilly's passing, which I didn't feel like today was the right day to share that information. So this week I'll do an internal messaging around this as well. And then I'm scheduled for a superintendent message at the end of this week. So I'll include a summary of this out to everybody as well, so that folks know what our plan is as a district in my superintendent's message on Friday.
Questions, comments? Ms. Landers.
So the lawsuit against Fountas and Pinal was filed by parents. So I haven't done a lot of research yet, but it's not a class action suit, I don't think that we could join in, but maybe at some point it becomes a class action suit that we join in, or maybe other districts intervene in this case and become plaintiffs. And I mean, if we're gonna have to buy a whole new curriculum, and maybe are there gonna be damages? Are there gonna be, I mean, this is a Consumer Protection Act case of some sort, so.
Yeah. So
I mean, I'm hoping at some point, I mean, maybe there's, some money here
Yeah.
for us to offset this cost that we're gonna have.
yeah, and maybe you and I can have an offline conversation, because you are speaking a little bit outside my wheelhouse. But I know I remember reading something in an article about potentially structuring it in a way so that it could be, but it's not currently structured that way, is my understanding. But again, it's not my area of expertise. I'd have to lean on legal counsel for that one. Yeah.
Ms. Bemis.
I've been tracking this since the governor made literacy a focal point and a lot of money, which was last January's budget. And so I'm hoping there are incremental things that we can do for the current third graders or the current fifth graders, or those who we understand may have some gaps now that we have updated information. And, I've been digging around a lot on the DESI website, and there are grants. Now, granted, they're already committed up through this school year, but I hope we begin to look at those, because they seem to be, I know they're going to continue in this governor's budget. I also think there's incremental things that we can begin to do that are just easily available. Maybe try it out, maybe a little piloting, not a big investment, through the Mass Literacy Council, and I suggest we start doing that now.
Great, thank you. A lot of information. Next, we have our school committee business consent agenda, which includes the donation from Deborah Benassi of the Bose headphones and the minutes from December 2nd, 2024.
Move the consent agenda.
A motion, do we have a second? All those in favor, any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Abstained. Okay. Bills, requisitions, and payroll has been passed around. Calendars. There is no school from December 23rd to January 1st. We will return to school on Thursday, January 2nd. And then following that, we'll have our school committee meeting on January 6th, which will include the first budget presentation. And public comment, there's no one left in the public, so I will skip that. Anyone raises their hand, the camera will not turn to show anyone sitting in the public. So we'll move to the last part. Does anyone want a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstained. Thank you, everyone.